All right, the doors are being closed. Show me, please. I'll say it one more time. If you think you're not going to have enough battery for the next 4 hours,
Can you go back to some?
just go and put your computer to sleep right now, and then we will tell you when to fire the laptop. We've got a few things to cover before, the background of the story and some concepts.
Thanks for telling us.
And then when this is done, we're going to start showing you some demos, and after that, you will have to do it yourself. So you've got probably I would say a good 25 minutes at least before you start doing the thing.
For the preparations, I mixed up the URIs to the lab account file that you're supposed to download. So if you get a 404, just go one folder back, and then
show it.
Yeah.
Just show it.
So if you follow the link, you should get to a page that looks like this. Is it that? Yeah, prerequisites. So, oh, that's ugly. Better. So this is the page that your tiny URL link should get you. And where is the prerequisites? And then we have a URL. Download the file mentioned on your paper from that link, which doesn't work. If you press on it, get a 404. Please go back to the Summit 2025. Internal app info, here it is. That's, yes.
That's the username.yaml. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's impossible to share credentials using GitHub in plain text. This is why we had to encrypt it, and this is causing the extra overhead. Security always creates extra overhead.
Click on one file, please. Open one file.
Okay, so the letter that you have gives you, first of all, the hint which file you should download.
Sorry.
It's not very nice.
It's because there's a thing just there.
Don't move. And it gives you an app ID that we will use later for authentication. The app ID or the app display name, of course, is not so important. And here we have the encrypted secret that allows you to connect with this app ID to our tenant and do stuff, right? And the other user that we have is that one here. And this one, including the password that we have encrypted here, allows you to access Azure DevOps, create pull requests, and have a look at the content, right? So this is the last lab that you might want to do.
Do you all have one of these? And if you want to do the exercises, you will need the credentials. Everyone's got credentials? All good?
Perfect.
Okay. Perfect.
Better? Thank you.
All right, let's get started then. So,
Okay.
Entra ID and M365 as code. So, who's been using DSC before? You're not allowed to answer over there, okay? Many of you. Who knows about M365 DSC? Okay, a few, but maybe.
The guys who are, do you know about it or have you tested it already?
Using it?
Using it? Using it mostly as most people for export or also for controlling stuff?
Control and build. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows about the DSC workshop that we presented before and on other places? No, you don't know about the DSC workshop. Who knows about the DSC community? A few of them. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
We have work to do.
We're not very good at communication.
Yeah.
All right, first of all, thanks to everyone and the sponsor. Jane Street. Oh, yeah. Good folks. Thank you, everyone. That really helps for the sponsors, and I know because I'm one of them over there. And there's a story, and today you will see that you are part of this story. You go too far? Oh, no, that's fine. You just go too far. Sorry.
I know what.
Yeah,
we
don't take this. Just leave it there.
Now it's locked.
Okay, good. So what's the story today? The story today is you are part of the same company, right? We all part of Synergy, and Synergy is it's a consulting business, and you're here to help some other businesses with their infrastructure, and especially this time is configuring something. So let's discover the story of the new customer that comes, and then they have the challenge, and we need to discover the challenge and see how we can help them. So I'm Gael, I'm the director, and this is Raimund.
I'm the solution architect.
You tell me, I don't know. He's the tech guy and the pretty face, right? So this is the office, and then in the office coming today is Bill. Bill is the platform manager at Parts Unlimited. Who's heard of Parts Unlimited before? Yeah, a few of you, yes. I'm sure more of you knows. So basically, we just want to draw back from the story of the Phoenix project. This is a very interesting book. I hope many of you have read it. This is why we're taking some of the characters from this book, because I would say it's the foundation of understanding a little bit the challenges that company faces. But sometimes I find the book to be a bit high level when you do PowerShell, and then you need to understand the DevOps concepts and practices. So probably today we just take some similarities. We will explain some concepts, but it's really good to read the book if you haven't. Highly recommend it. That was really transformative for my career, and I hope it does the same to you. So it's a great book. Today we're going to be much more hands-on. So managing IT during an M&A, you have an acquisition, you get a new business, and then you say, well, we need to create a new environment for those people, and then we need to put them into that environment, get them ready to do some work. And usually you have tons of other things that goes. IT is probably the thing that we think last, and it's very challenging. And that's just one of the examples. Sometimes it's just because your company wants to have a new initiative, which is let's do some Azure stuff, or let's move over there. So let's see, Bill is saying, okay, let's see how the consultancy can help us. And this company is us, but today it's you, because you will be doing some of the work. So if you know, I talked earlier about the gather.town platform. This is what you do. You go, and then you can talk to someone, so it feels much more interactive than if you're just on a team call. Mm-hmm. So basically, you've got Bill that goes on, come and talk to me. And I say, welcome to the company. And then you have some challenges with M365 and Entra ID. You already have an environment, you know what it's like, but spinning up a new environment, a new configuration is complex because you've done it before, but then you need to reproduce what you've done and what's the challenges. So it's an exciting project, but how can we be efficient in doing this? So let's run Raimund in a meeting room, and then we'll discuss about, okay, what's the project, what's the background, what needs to be done, and then we will try to get some more details. So Bill is saying, I know we already use Entra ID. We've done that. We have M365. We already have that. But now we have this new entity that we're building. We need to get the same kind of configuration for them. So it's probably a new tenant or something. But we already have lots of tools on-prem that does similar stuff as Entra ID and M365. Who uses M365 and Entra ID in the room? Half, I would say half of the room, a good half of the room. So we're just going to go and then remind a little bit the introduction, what it is in a high level.
Yeah, the very high level is Entra ID is just a successor of Active Directory, but cloud ready and as a service. So yesterday I did my last bits for preparing the code signing session for tomorrow, and it is always nice to see something as a service, right? Setting up a HSM, a certificate storage, usually is a thing that takes 2 people a year to understand and do it right. With Azure Key Vault as a service, you do it in 10 minutes and it just works. Right? Same with Entra ID. Entra ID works globally. You just create your users, you start in less than an hour, and previously we needed to think about synchronization of domain controllers, replication, sites and services, and so many FRS, right, and the file system replication, so many things on top that we didn't want to actually care about. We just wanted to have users to be able to authenticate, and Entra ID just solves that. And I think one of the best features is guest accounts, right? You can participate with your colleagues in other companies. Companies can work together in a B2B relationship, and this was previously also a very, very hard thing to do.
It's like my wife says, I just want email. Yeah, but if you want email, you need to have the Exchange server. We don't need this anymore. We can just spin it up, and that takes just a couple of hours.
Yeah, and I really like the seamless integration with all the other services, right? Like email, Teams, OneDrive, SQL, you name it, right? Also, what I did yesterday, the Azure Key Vault, you have direct access to all the service principals, identities, and user accounts that you have created in Entra ID, and it just works like that. That makes life very easy. Yeah, great for authentication and authorization of CloudWorks. So anything Microsoft Cloud related is, well, the heart of it is Entra ID. Without Entra ID, authentication will be pretty hard to do.
So in the cloud era that we're in, you have a new thing which is cloud configured. You just have the groups managed in Entra ID. You just say, this is the group, I give permissions to the group. The same thing that we used to do with AD, now we do that in a cloud, cloud first, I would say, solution.
The look and feel actually is very similar.
Yeah, very
and the
similar.
principles as well. Yeah.
So next, we love this one. Microsoft 365 Copilot. So that's a question. Actually, we've got people from Microsoft in the room, at least one at the back over there.
Well, let's raise the question. Do you know what Microsoft 365 Copilot is?
Everyone knows? Because I don't.
Maybe you think you know.
No, we're not too sure on this one. And I tried to actually look what's the actual name if it was Microsoft 365, and it's been changing names recently. And I believe the new name, and I wait for confirmation, but maybe I'm wrong. I believe the new name since January is Microsoft 365 Copilot. It's not just the functionality, it's actually the name of the product now. Yeah, that's correct? I'm not wrong, right? Yeah, okay. So I didn't know, I wasn't sure, because in some marketing it says that, and then some of the marketing slides is still the old stuff. So we're interested in, and that's only since the beginning. So what's in Microsoft 365 Copilot? Well, that's the thing that we used to call Office 365, and then it's got different names. But then on top of this, we have some other elements.
Yeah, the Office 3, then of course the email service, Exchange Online, right, which is heavily interconnected with Entra ID, SharePoint and OneDrive as well, and finally Entra ID plus things like Intune, Defender, Purview. It's hard to be an expert in any of these technologies, but yeah, we are constantly learning.
So who's using those services in their company?
All.
Yes,
Yeah.
Almost everyone.
Yeah.
You at the back, I know why. So yes, most of the companies now, they use this, and it's usually a challenge to configure everything together. While it's very central, and then as we said, you've got Entra ID, and then you can manage a lot of things there. You have different ways to manage them, and then usually you have different teams looking after those, and it's getting really hard to have the collaboration needed and the good principles to collaborate with this configuration.
Right.
So in the scenario that Bill told us, usually starting from a greenfield is not really an option. Usually it's hybrid, and then it's messy. There's already Active Directory that's been there for more than 20 years. And there's a synchronization that goes in the scenario. But in this case, we're lucky because it's a new entity, so they can start from a greenfield project. They know how they want to configure it. They don't know how they can do this, but they have the ideas and the principle ready. So in this case, it's easier. It's cloud only. There's no synchronization. There's no on-prem AD, and there's no need for legacy service. So they only do cloud, Azure cloud. Everything's integrated. That should be easy, right? So and as we said before, it's a great way to spin up a new environment and then just do the configuration, and not to have to deploy services and servers and stacks and stuff like that. One more. So yes, they have an existing tenant, and if you've read the book again, the Phoenix Projects, there's a character in the book which is Brent. Brent is brilliant, but is the guy that knows everything, but doesn't have time to tell you what is done. He just fixes stuff. He's really good. And in this case, it didn't happen again. He's not available, so you can't go and ask him. Maybe he's on holiday, maybe he's forced. You always have the same challenge again. So he knows Azure. Like, obviously he's good. He's the guy who knows every technology. The problem is, he probably did that through the GUI, and, well, he didn't have time to take screenshot to document it. That's the problem when you go through the GUI. You just click, 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 click. Oh, we've been there before, right? That's why we learned PowerShell. So you go click next, and then you have this challenge. So big news, the GUI is still bad. We're in 2025, and I still see many customers, they go through the Azure GUI, and they say, well, let's do this. And then they go and they start clicking, and after configuring something for 20 minutes, oh, what did I do, by the way? And they don't really remember what they've done, so they need to reproduce it. And if they missed a step documenting it, because they had to pick up the phone, because there was something on fire, and they tried to distinguish it, they forgot where they were at, the documentation is not finished, and then they're always trying to play catch up. We've had this problem before, and it was the Windows Server era with SAD server on desktop, if you remember Jeffrey Snover saying this. We have the same thing with Azure if you use the GUI. The good thing with Azure, you can export usually the ARM definitions or the bicep definition, and then you can remember what you've configured. Or you can do some exports, as we've heard this morning. But still, you're playing catch-up. So obviously, we know better, because we PowerShell people. We can improve it with automation, right? So there's always limitation without abstraction. But let's look at how do you create an Entra ID group. So we go back to the basics, go back to the GUI, and then we'll do this.
Okay, let's do it maybe live. Then I know also if my connection to the tenant works as expected.
It's a good test.
Yes, it is. So here we have the tenant. Let's increase the font size. And here we have our Entra ID. Do we? Yeah, here. I think this is not very thrilling for you guys, right? You click on groups, you click on new group. Let's give it the name, test G1, no description needed, create, perfect, here it goes. Everything correct, right?
As Raimund is doing this, you can see how many blades and clicks he had to do. So imagine you have to teach that to someone new. Then he needs to take a screenshot for every blade and then say, you need to do this here, doing that.
And imagine if your colleague is reading your instructions in a month and the UI has changed by then, right? Then all the screenshots are not much worth.
Sounds like that SCART issue. You've been there before.
Yeah. When preparing something for customers, you browse the web and you find documentation and you realize, wait a minute, this doesn't end up anymore, right? So many things have changed, and articles from 5 years back, you don't even need to read them because the change is too quick.
Obsolete.
Obsolete, indeed. Yeah. Good. That was the very short video.
Yes. So as we said, when you're clicking through the GUI, you have to document, but documenting, there's several parts. You have how to do it, how to create, where to click. And then you also need to remember that let's say you had one group, then you had another group. So you have, what have you done before? So you created that group for what reason and things like that. So you have to document what entry do you need, why have you created all of those entries, what are they used for? So if you think that because it's in the GUI and you can see it, that's documented, that's wrong. You don't know why you've done something. There's always, you need some more information to say, we've added this because of this X, Y, Z reason.
And that, by the way, still happens. So I once, a couple of weeks ago, started a DSC project with a big European phone company. And DSC didn't work in this context because they had the same app between 5 and 10 times for thousands of apps. And nobody even knew why the app is there, who uses it, what the authentication mechanism is. So, of course, they used the UI to create the app. The intention was there, but it was not being able to follow up anymore. Yeah.
So you don't see it, but what we see is Michael at the back was like this, because you worked for the CAT team and you've seen that before. So we're missing some data. If you go through the GUI, you're missing the data, what has changed, when, why, and by whom. So I want to point out one thing very important is the intent. There's something that you want to do, and then let's say there's a new employee. So HR says, there's a new employee, we need to get him set up. That's the intention. You want to create a group to give some permissions or restrict permissions. That's the intention. If you just click things, and then you don't document why you're doing the thing, after an hour, when it's me, because I'm a goldfish, don't have any memory, or if it's someone else in the team taking like, why did we do that? And I'm sure that happens to all of us. Why did we do that? And then you try to reverse engineering why you've done it, and then at some point you remember, oh, that's why. So that's not efficient when you go through the GUI. So how to prevent errors when repeating the steps? We know better. We do PowerShell. So we can automate. We automate with PowerShell. And if you have code, you can re-execute the code, which means every task is reproducible. You can do it again. The same thing, you just do it again. There's less error because there's less humans, let's be honest. Humans always introduce errors. Less humans in your execution, in your changes, then less risks for something to go wrong. It's easier to improve because you have the how to do stuff. So then if you modify something, then you can keep track, especially if you use SCM, so a source control manager, or VCS, version control system, whatever. I have a session on that, I think, on day 4. And it's cheaper to test because you can run it once and then you can destroy what you've done and run it again to make sure you trust the system. In the keynote this morning, it's about trusting the data. It goes exactly the same way with automation. You have to build trust in your automation.
But what do we need for testing? We need a test environment, and so many companies still don't have a valid test environment, neither in Azure nor in their old on-prem world.
But why? Because it's very difficult.
Yeah.
We have a test environment that is meant to be a reproduction of the prod environment. And then we start doing something and then say, okay, that works. Let's push it to prod. And then, there's a fire on prod, so we need to go changing prod directly. And then, you have different environments, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse.
But some companies don't even have a dev environment. So that means they are testing all their PowerShell scripts in their production Azure tenant or Active Directory, and it's very hard to understand why this still happens.
It's not true. Every company have a test environment. It's just production. Hey, everyone's nodding. Yeah. All right, so now let's look at, we go one step further. We are PowerShell people. Let's do some PowerShell. We're going to do the same thing as we did, so creating the group, but this time with PowerShell.
Okay. Let me connect to my box to see if everything is... where is it? There it is.
Is that your wife?
Yes.
Which country is it?
Russia.
Russia.
Securing remote connection. Yeah, the internet has some trouble here. Maybe we need to go back to the video.
This is why I said that would be good to have videos recordings.
Yeah.
Come on, everyone, do the magic. Do the magic.
Is it still online?
Or maybe they block...
Maybe they blocked... Well, that would be nice. But then securing connection wouldn't come up.
Yeah. All right, let's play the video in the meantime.
But later we need this stuff anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, but let's play in the meantime. Yeah. It's not so thrilling anyway.
Okay, hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, that's Gael's magic.
I just do PowerPoint. It's like...
Okay, let's see. What are
Hopefully
we going to do here? Is it playing?
If you
It's
press...
already playing. 17, 18. Maybe there was a delay until we start. 25 seconds of nothing.
You paused it. You paused it. Yes.
Ah. Wait a
If
minute.
you can't play the video, that's really...
That's interesting because it's playing here. Let's.
What have you done? Okay, let's try to RDP again then.
Wait a minute. No, let's remove the presenter view. Then we have more control about what's happening.
Do it. And then you can just go there. And let's skip a little bit forward. And then see if that works.
Yeah, something is moving. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Put a cursor. Yeah. We just need to wait for it now. There we go.
Okay. First of all, we are connecting to Azure, right? So we will see it in a second.
So what happened is they say, well, you need to authenticate, and then to authenticate, it pops up
Yeah, I think Alex does a session on all that graph stuff at the moment, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Unlucky for you, you can't attend.
Yeah, so this is just you need to just provide the tenant ID and, very importantly, the scopes that you want to do. So if you do not ask for the group read write all scope, then you won't be able to manipulate groups. Okay, and then first of all we start with reading groups. First of all we want to see who we are in the Azure tenant. So get mg context gives you an idea, also the permissions that you have. And then we are trying to read one single group first, all groups first, and then let's create a new one.
Okay, press pause when this is running. When this is running. Good time. Okay.
Here we go.
Who's done this one before? Who's done that before? Okay, so barely half of you. So let's keep going, but that's one of the exercises. So if you've done it before and you don't want to use your battery to do that, you can just do it later and then you're going to bundle up because you've done that before, so you know what's going on. So let's,
Right, then we connect to mggraph again.
No, you've restarted it.
I did? Ah, come on. Yeah, here we go. So...
No, it's just testing that what is done before worked.
So now we're making sure in the UI that the groups are already appearing there as well. Successful.
And this has been created. All right. So now we've done something in PowerShell. So we went from someone clicking in the GUI. We now have like some lines of PowerShell we can reproduce. That's why you can, write them, and then you can improve on them. If you want to add another one, if you want to change the name of the group, then this is easier to change because now you can just change some text and not just pictures or where to click.
And you can do a 1 to 10 pipe for each, and then you have 10 of these magical nice groups. So,
Shift F5. Oh yeah, okay. All right, go next. Straight. So the first hands-on, we probably will go next. Okay, now let's do the hands-on. If you want, who wants to do this hands-on? This one. You've never done connecting to Azure like this, creating the group. If you haven't done it, you can fire your laptop and then you can do it. And everyone, have you tried to do the first step, which is the prerequisite that we showed at the beginning, which is decrypting the credentials which are in GitHub? We couldn't just put all the credentials because that's a live tenant. And if we were just to put the credentials unencrypted, then everyone could have it and do it. So basically, the first step is going to the file, finding the file, and decrypting it using a module that does that.
Yeah, and by the way, you don't have a user account in the Azure tenant with the respective rights. You have an app. What's the advantage of having an app? Right? Why can't a user not be automated? Yeah, MFA, condition access policy, so a lot of stuff that usually prevents a user from doing automatic stuff. So the first thing in all my projects is making the project working with an app registration, because otherwise all the automation constantly breaks because of some windows popping up. And there was a recent change in the Microsoft authentication that the first login is just the normal browser. The second login to Exchange is somewhere in the background, and you don't see it unless you minimize all the other windows. It's so annoying. It's so annoying, and it doesn't use the cache. So you need to copy and paste the passwords from and the username as well from KeePass. Yeah.
So we will take this opportunity for you to do the hands-on. If you have any question, raise your hand. And in the meantime, Raimund's going to try to fix his RDP session. Otherwise, we're going to get screwed for the next simulator.
Okay. Something happened, but I think...
Oh, it's getting there. It was just very, very slow.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully.
It works. So, connection is still there.
It's better. It's already better.
Yeah, but you see, it just has restarted.
Nice.
Yeah. That happens all the time now. I have no clue why on 3 machines, freshly deployed. Okay.
Never mind.
Never mind.
So, what's the task when you need to decrypt the credential?
Okay, let's follow the documentation together. Microsoft, no, come on. 365 DSC workshop.
So everything we're going through, all the exercise and everything, it's online anyway. It's in DSC community / Microsoft 365 DSC workshop. So you can find it there, and there's a special folder in there which is Summit.
Yes, Summit folder. Then we go to the preparations, and it tells us which software to install. I guess most of you have the software anyway installed. Then install a couple of additional modules: PowerShell YAML, protected data, and datum protected data. So let's just.
So protected data was a module created by Dave Wyatt, for those who know. And then it was just a way to encrypt objects, a little bit like protect CMS message, but then you could have a credential object completely serialized if you want, and encrypted and serialized, and then you could decrypt it. So that's what you're using when you go through those steps. And that's what Raimund is showing right now.
Trying to show.
There you go.
What is that? Which PowerShell are we going to use here? Okay, let's try to do it in the native PowerShell window. That's interesting, isn't it?
Twisted value. Doom, doom, doom.
Is there the old install module? Wait a minute.
It's because you're not using PS resource get, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm not. But anyway, it should work right out of the box. The good thing is I have it already installed. So let's skip that. You need to do it, and hopefully on your machine it runs better than on mine. So next thing would be download the prepared file, which is not in the right path. I screwed it up. So go back to Summit, go back to internal app info, and I will go to the very bottom. So hopefully,
Do you want to take a file?
yeah, let's take one, so that we don't create any conflict.
We'll take this one, which is the same as you have different accounts. So this one is number 61.
Number 61. There we go.
Okay.
And let's copy it and create a new file here. Yeah, let's do it within the DSC workshop, no problem. cred.yml. Okay, then we put everything in here, save it, that's it. So if we have saved it, the next thing would be to open the PowerShell again, get rid of this window, and per the instruction, as far as I remember, it's a get content. Get content, too many commandlets. The path is the credential file, and we want to have it in raw, and we want to convert it from YAML and store it in X.
Variable.
And X is something that contains now these encrypted strings, right? And they can be decrypted if we take a password.
The key.
Tell me my key, which is it? What's VWATZ?
Yeah.
And then
VWWW.
Okay, let's see. And then we do a $x dot the encrypted secret, pipe it to unprotect datum.
Yeah.
And the key, so usually you use this with certificates, but in this case,
Passphrase.
It hangs.
Is because you haven't loaded the module.
Yeah, I think in the background something happens.
Did you do a no-op as well?
What?
No-op, build, no-op.
There it is. No, not yet.
It's okay. Yeah.
So the passphrase is $pass, and what comes back is this one.
And this is the secret, the encrypted secret.
Right. So then we take the secret. Come on. And we do a $cred or dollar. Let's do a dollar secret first. Equals that one, and then we have a secret equals dollar secret pipe convert to seeker string. No, not script extender, seeker string. I think you guys have done it a million of times already. Oh yeah, that is not working.
Secret. That's the, yeah.
Okay, then we build a credential object, and the credential object is ps credential. Nice. It's hard to use the mouse here on a non-even table. We do a new. And what we need first is the app ID, so that's the one you're taking, which goes for the username, and the password is and the password is our secret. Okay.
$cred. And now you've got your credential object created.
Yeah. So, and with that, we do a connect mg graph. The tenant ID is this one, and is it the right one? 15 tenant ID is A16. That's the correct one.
It's in the file as well.
And the client credentials. And then you should connect, or should be connected to our tenant with your personal app. Do we?
Yeah, that works. If the network is good enough.
This is from Azure to Azure.
Oh yeah.
Takes unusually long.
Has anyone managed to do that so far? Yes.
It was working?
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Okay, then it should work for all of you, but not for me. Here we go.
There you go.
Here we have it. Right, and then we can do a get mg group. Let's see.
So you should be able to do that, and then you should be able to see the same groups. We're all connected to the same tenant, so you should have the same information.
Yeah, and obviously someone has created already some groups. And by the way, the bad thing here is, as I also mentioned in the instructions, you don't need to be very creative creating the group names, because Entra ID does not come up with a conflict if the group name has already been taken, which is, I don't know why they have made this decision. It's a big disaster.
It's a feature, let's call it like this, right?
So the only way to identify, to distinguish between the groups is then the ID, which is not very good to remember, right? Okay. So obviously you guys have managed it already. New MG, come on. I'm not used to type in this kind of setup. MG group. MG, let's help. Yeah, and here we go. And that would be the command.
Okay, who's still doing it? Still in progress? Okay,
Okay.
we'll give you a couple more minutes.
So let's see if I still do have the DSC demo, otherwise, come on, Control O for open.
No, you're in the terminal, yes.
And I'm still in the terminal.
The focus in the terminal. You don't know how to click.
No, it's
I
the
know,
mouse.
I know.
Control O, and let's go to, let's hope that this is, yeah, that is the final configuration, and we are kind of safe. Okay.
Save for later.
Yeah, if the demo doesn't work as expected.
Okay, maybe go back to the slides.
We can get slide ready, Shift F5.
Is it presenter mode? Yeah.
I can see some of you still typing. So for those not typing, let's think about, okay, we've done it. It's an improvement from the GUI, and I think we all knew that already before coming into this session, but then there's some limitations by doing this. And then with the state of infrastructure as code this morning, maybe you have some clue about the challenges when you just do code like this. It's what we've seen this morning, imperative code. Think about the limitation. What are the limitations of writing the scripts? What are the challenges? So that's an easy one, because how many commands did you type? 3, 4. So if you have this in a script, it's like a few lines. And you would do the same thing, decrypt or get some credentials with a secrets management module, things like that. But then if you have to do this every time, and then you start adding all the groups, and you start adding all the logics, and then testing, does it exist already before I create it? Because I can create many times the same group, and no one's going to complain. I mean, not Azure is going to complain. So then I probably don't want to have twice the same group, because otherwise I won't know which one it is. So there's a lot of implications about this.
So, by the way, this M365 DSC workshop contains a bunch of scripts that are be able to set up a existing tenant or put an existing tenant under source control in less than 30 minutes. So we have all the scripts made available that are configuring the Azure DevOps project, the workers, everything you need. But it was so painful to get the stuff done in a certain way, so the scripts also work if some of the bits were already existing, right? So the big problem with any pretty complex script is that if it breaks in the middle, how do you get it started again, right?
We'll get back to this in a bit.
Yeah.
So, is it working? You managed to connect? No? Okay, we'll keep going. You can still working on this, and then we're going to talk a little bit of what we've seen so far. So scripts, good, right? So we love scripts with PowerShell people. We love it. There's definitely advantages to the script. It's repeatable. You can do it. That today is the example. I couldn't go and then give you a Word document to say, well, if you want to create through the GUI, you need to click there. You need to type this. We could have done that, but then that would have taken probably a good 30 minutes with many mistakes, right? Now we can give you the code, and then you can repeat the code. So we reduce the human-induced error. And then we haven't given you a function, but if you create a module with a function, we could say, well, just run this function with those parameters, and then you can make it happen. And we can add logging and tracing, so then we know if we all use the same function that store loggings, I don't know, log analytics or something else, then we know what has changed and who's changed what and when. We're still missing one part, which is the why. Why are we doing this? And we'll get back to that. So there's still limitations. The complexity is not scalable. And that's probably one of the biggest. We are dealing with imperative instructions. We've seen that this morning. We say, oh, we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. If it's in this stage, we're going to do this, or then we're going to do that. So there's a lot of, there's the whole recipe of what you want to achieve. But then the more things you want to do, the list of instructions goes on and on and on. And you need to make sure you do it in the right order. And then you don't duplicate something if it's already been done, like creating a group that exists already. So it's very context sensitive. If something already exists, you need to know what exists, and then that means the script goes longer and longer with more tests. So there's some limitations. And again, as Raimund said, what if the script stops halfway? You're doing something, you're running the commands that you've done, and then it says stop, and then you have to take a break, you have to take a call, there's a fire again somewhere, you need to go extinguish the fire, you come back to your desk. Oh, what was I doing again? Where I'm at, And that's sometimes hard to know where you were and not duplicate the group because it already exists. And there's another concept that you need to think about when you do automation is the automation fear cycle. Has anyone heard of the automation fear cycle? No?
Me neither before meeting him.
Yes, it's if you know, what was the name? The book from Keith Morris, which is Infrastructure as Code, especially the first edition. Keith Morris wrote two books, two editions of the same book, and basically he goes through some of the concept. And the automation phase cycle is very true. As soon as you start making a change outside of your automation, you have a script that does the configuration of the group. But, someone is in a hurry, and he's got the GUI open, so let's do a few click, And then he goes and makes a change outside the automation. So the first thing that happens, well, it was outside, so the configuration becomes inconsistent with the automation. What happens next? Well, you created a snowflake. You have something unique. What goes next? Well, you've made something, unique and different. So the problem is you're going to start. What if now we want to run the automation again? Well, I'm not too sure because this guy made a change on the GUI, so I don't know if that's going to break my script or not. So you lose the trust in your automation. And if you lose trust in your automation, you're going to do more change outside of it. So this concept is very important. If you start going outside and circumvent your automation, you're going to lose trust. And as we've seen with data this morning, losing trust is the worst thing that can happen because you have to build trust over time, otherwise you're going to stop using it, and then you go back to the click next and all the troubles that goes with it. So be very wary of this.
That's a node slide.
So we go next?
Yeah.
So lucky for us, back in, when was it, 2013, the PowerShell team and the Microsoft employee at the back over there helped deliver a DSC. And DSC has got this concept, and that's coming from other tools like we've seen this morning, Chef, Puppet, which is basically doing idempotency. So you have the check, you can get the information, test is the group already set up or not, and then run it. So the idea is you can apply the same configuration over and over again. You're always going to end up with the same state. It doesn't matter if you've done it before or not. The thing, the management of the thing, of the resource, is made in a way that you can reuse it over and over again. And you can apply it. You don't have to think about, okay, where was I in my script? I've got interrupted. What do I do now? This is taken care in that piece of code.
And this solved so many problems.
Yes.
And actually, it's not rocket science. It rather helps you to put your code into a shape that just makes sense, right?
And you do that all the time. You have error handling. You're testing it. The problem is, if you do that in one way and your colleague does that in another way, like you not necessarily have the same approach to it, and then you don't necessarily trust what is done. So that's why there's a format, an interface. There's practices that says, well, if you do it this way, you can assume that it's going to work as a resource and it's going to be idempotent. And that's the key element, is you have to just do the same way every resources.
By the way, a problem that got solved thanks to DSC and the idempotency is doing a script that needs to survive a reboot. Right? So many applications require a reboot in the middle of the process. And how do you start without human interaction? Maybe you create a scheduled task, or maybe a one once, so some dirty hack, right? In DSC, you don't even need to care about this, because DSC, right after the reboot, starts the whole process again, tests for the existence or the desired state of all the previous steps, and then just starts where the test method returns we are not happy, right? So it solves a lot of issues that maybe initially we haven't even thought about.
But we don't need to restart Azure services, so at the moment this is not a concern. Well,
Not
hopefully
really.
we don't have to.
Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit and examine what are the differences. This morning you heard already in the state-of-the-art session about infrastructure as code the terms imperative versus declarative, right? Imperative, and at first, if you look at these lines, you think, why should I ever go for declarative? It's much more complicated, right? Imperative is just a one-liner, and then we have at least 4 lines achieving the same result. So why do we do this? This demonstration is pretty easy, Windows feature, but let's think about a script that is creating a file and want to store some data in that file. No, it was something else. It was creating a folder and then sharing that folder as a file share. So how many checks do you need to implement to make sure that this script always runs in an idempotent way regardless of the state of the machine? And then it looks like this. No, this. Right? And this is not even finished halfway, right? First, we need to assume the share does not exist. Then we need to find out if the share does exist. If it does not exist, we want to write a certain message. If it exists, we want to write a certain message and put the share existing to true. Otherwise, we go for the new SMB share and create it. But this is only creating the share. So what about creating the folder? What about the permissions? What about the share settings? So it gets pretty quickly so complex that this script is no longer just 10 or 15 lines. It easily gets up to 50, 60, 700 lines, because you also want to have some extended logging to know why the script has made a certain decision. Right?
And then we had the point here where if you want to know what happens in that line, you need to read the lines before. So you need to understand what the context before. So we're lacking an abstraction. No, we're looking about what calls we're doing on the Windows system, in this case, the API we're configuring. But that means you need to remember what happened before. And that means there's a lot of things going on that basically, when you think about your infrastructure, you don't really care how you set up a share. You just say, I want to share, make it so.
The cake this morning, right? You want to have a cake, and we don't want to have a recipe, we want just the cake.
I just want a cake.
Yeah. Okay. So, which DSC version are we going to use, Gael?
Yes, so this morning we've seen about DSC v3. Don't leave, Michael. Or we've had many discussions about those things. So basically we have the PSDSC v1. So when we talk about DSC, if you followed for the last, how many years now? 10 years, 13, 12 years, something like that, yes. So that's been a while, and then there was a lot of evolution. Actually, most of the apparent evolution came quite late for the latest one. So we started with PSDSC v1, and that still ships in every Windows machine, because that's still what ships with the WMF, so PowerShell 5 and all of these things. What we use at the moment is this, for one principal reason, is after, in some of the versions, they removed the LCM, the local configuration manager. So we still need the LCM for some of the automation. We could work around it, but that would mean...
Do you guys know what the LCM is?
It's just the Windows service that everyone has installed on the machine if they have a Windows machine. If you have a Windows server, you have it there. If you have a Windows build agent, as an example, you have it there.
And without the LCM, there is no engine to actually take your configuration and act on it, right? So that's a critical part that we are urgently missing in the DSC version 2, and we won't get it, and we don't have it in version 3 as well.
Yes, but that's a story for a different time, but you've got the PSDSC v1, which is Windows PowerShell only, so the old WMF5, PowerShell 5 version. And then they released the PSDSC v2. This is the module, the PowerShell desired state configuration module. And the version 2 at the moment is the 2.07 version. This one supports PowerShell 7, so the latest PowerShell, and the Windows PowerShell for some of the things. So no, actually that execute either in PowerShell 7 or PowerShell 5. And also you can do compilation of the MOV file. We will get back to that later. But that's a new version of the module that you can install from the gallery. And now we have this little one, which is the PSDSC v3 beta. That was an attempt to make this work cross-platform. And that's just a new version of the module, which is, stop laughing. So, which is working on Linux. So you can do similar things on Linux. You have to use class-based resource. So some of the other, the script resource don't work. There's a little challenge there is if you look in the gallery and you just try to find it, you can't find it anymore, but I'll get back to that in a bit. And now, as we've seen today, very quickly, and there will be another session with Steve Lee and you, Michael, I believe, there will be DSC v3. The evolution is DSC v3 is written in Rust, and then it doesn't really care the language of the resource that you run. But obviously it supports the PowerShell resource, and this one is natively cross-platform as well. So the idea is it's any resource, any language, but this feature that between the PSDSC v1 and the DSC v3, you see the name, it's like, it sounds the same, but it's not the same. And actually it doesn't do the same thing and it doesn't do it the same way. It's a bit confusing, but they decided, against my advice, I would say, they decided to call it the same way. So don't get confused, and that's why I have this slide. Right now, we will talk about the DSC v2 and the DSC v1. That's what we will use. The principles are the same. My dependency is the same. The tooling around, the solution around is a bit different. If you want to know more, if you want more details, obviously there will be the session, and then I'm happy to discuss this, and I'm sure Michael is the same there. And you have Jason, you have so many people here you can access to. Even Raimund, but I wouldn't trust what he says. So the idea is some of those things is Linux friendly. It's meant to be running on Linux. And then the problem with the PSDSC v3 beta that you do to do that on Linux, which is still required if you want to do Linux configuration on with, what's the name again? It's a machine configuration. The problem is this one is unlisted, so you won't find it, but it's still there. And those is for Azure policy, no, what's the name now? Azure policy machine configuration, right? Azure machine configuration. So you have Azure machine configuration. They have their own agent, which is not the LCM, and then you can create your package where you compile them off, and you can do the similar things. So if you hear about DSC, there's actually a lot of little different branches that goes on, and there's also Winget doing some very interesting stuff at the moment. So I just wanted to put that back here, so then you have a view that if you hear DSC, think that it may not be that simple. At the moment, we are focusing on the old technology because it's not that you have the little DSC.exe you can run with DSC v3. All the solution around that we've built, that there's more components that that would be required to adapt what we've done so far, but with the new agent, which has been GA'd only for 4 weeks. So that's also why we're not there yet.
Good. Let's have a look at the DSL, the domain-specific language for DSC. As you've heard this morning as well, it's all declarative. That means we don't care what DSC actually does to create the file. All we care about is the definition of what file we want to create and how it looks like. So we're starting very basic with a file, just to bring everybody through the same level. And then we are moving from DSC file-based, or creating a file, to M365 DSC, getting the authentication done, and all the stuff that is necessary to create a group there. So first, what we always need to have is a configuration, which is working pretty similar like a function. And in there, we can specify the resources, but I rather call it configuration items that are talking to resources. So the resource knows exactly the how we are going to create the file and how we put the content there. So the resource is actually the magic thing. And it's very good that DSC version 3 is supporting the old PowerShell-based resources, because the community has put so much effort in there. How many resources do we have in total?
I don't know. There's more than 90 repositories, and then for each repository, it's a resource module. So then in one module, you can have, I don't know if there's SQL DSC as an example, they probably have, I don't know, dozens of resources.
Yeah, and the code quality is something that I have rarely seen in the PowerShell DevOps space. So usually Gael was very keen of enforcing coding best practices.
No, it wasn't me. I code dirty, so that wasn't me. It took me a while to adapt, but then at some point I saw the light and I understood why they were doing this. Is when you have 90 repositories, but they all look the same, you don't have to look, for different formatting, where you put your brackets, where you put your space. And then with the PS script analyzer, and then all the tools linting, Pester, you can test and validate that everyone is doing it the same way. And the DSC community, because we all spread around the world and then we contribute when we've got time, we can do that because we have the tooling around, and that's very convenient.
So quite often customers are asking me, is it okay to use the DSC resource from some untrusted source? This morning we've heard that there will be a trusted source, but the GitHub, the PowerShell gallery is definitely not trusted, and there is a lot of code that hasn't been reviewed for years. But if you take, for example, the SQL Server DSC module, it comes with, I don't know, about 80 resources, and it runs 6,500 tests before it gets published.
Against each version of the SQL Server.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a code quality that none of you would ever achieve, even as a little software development team, because the effort and the hours put into just the single resource module is huge, right? And so I think also this will guide to a success for DSC version 3, as we can use all the stuff that we already have. Good.
Just a quick one on this, the DSL. Remember that DSC v3 doesn't use this DSL anymore, which is another thing. Now it's not that it's not using a DSL anymore, but it's using a different DSL, which is in YAML files and which is or bicep. But that's a story for another time when they will finish the bicep support.
Okay, if you use DSC out of the box, what do we get?
So imagine that you've never used DSC before, and then you go on Microsoft Docs, and then you say, well, I want to create a configuration, and I want to apply this configuration to, let's say, a machine for now.
Yeah, so the idempotency is something that we will take a look in a minute. Configuration data. Who has heard of the term configuration data in the relationship to DSC? Most of you.
3, 4,
yeah.
4, 5.
Okay.
Okay, so you kind of know what it is, but you don't know exactly Not everyone knows how to manage this.
Yeah, okay. We will see in a minute what this means and why configuration data is really crucial to any kind of infrastructure as code project. And what we want to tackle is the configuration drift.
That's the guy, you know, that had the GUI open earlier and then he made a change and then didn't tell anyone. If he does that and then you have your configuration which is managed in a file, they say, hey, you changed it, but it's already set to be something else. Whatever the guy changed once, it's going to be overridden. And then if you change it again, it's going to be overridden. So you don't have this problem where you have the automation phase cycle because he converges back to the expected results. So the guy that's been making the changes every single time, at some point, he will be tired and say, okay, I've made the change 10 times. Why is it reverts back every time? It's because DSC will manage the drift, the configuration drift, and it will put it back every time into where it should be.
I've heard that there are people that are not getting tired of doing the same change over and over and over again. So that means that many of the companies I'm working with have chosen not to have this autocorrect function, but rather have a reporting function. So if somebody changes something that he shouldn't do, then at least you get a reporting message and you know, or you can figure out what went wrong in the first place and why this guy or this girl has made a change she or he wasn't supposed to do, right? So it's either autocorrect or reporting.
But for those who are paid to just close tickets, you know, that's great. I've closed 20 times the same tickets this week. You know,
wrong incentives.
Exactly.
Okay, good. Let's have a short demo on creating a file out of the box.
There will be a test after that.
Yeah. So let's do it. Let's do it here. It's cleaner. Come on. New.
We've done some DSC configuration before, maybe just for a test. Yeah,
okay.
maybe half. Okay, so this one is just to make sure that you understand the principle. So he's going to show how to do it. Then you can do it in the next exercise. You can apply it, and then you will see like some of the challenges. So
it's already there.
It's magic.
So Copilot thinks that we want to create a web server. No, we don't. So what we do is we talk to the file resource, and well, not bad.
That's pretty good.
Let's take that. Okay. No, we don't need a second file. One is fine.
Copilot.
Yeah. So the file works as expected. Why do we know, or why do we know without Copilot, or how could we have known without Copilot, what parameters a file resource wants to have? We can open our PowerShell and do something like get DSC resource, and we want to have the resource file.
You've got intelligence.
Wait a minute. First we create. The thing is, we have installed the M365 DSC module on this computer, and this module comes with about 450 resources. And yeah, the discovery mechanism is not the fastest one.
Yep.
It should be much faster on your box.
Which actually, in DSC v3, that's something they really improved. Discovery is much faster.
Yeah. So let's continue and let's not wait for that. So first we are creating a DSC configuration that looks like this. This is something that Windows doesn't understand. So we need to convert it into something that Windows understands, and this looks like this. File 1. No. Sometimes Copilot is not really... And the output, it hasn't... there it is. And the output path could be, no, that's not very good. Let's do it in DSC. Verbose force, okay.
You're not in that folder right now.
Let me first of all store this in 1. Okay, and if we run this whole script, let's hope that, oh, it runs in an error. Wait a minute, sorry. That's the debug configuration that started the build script and not the script that we are working on. Here we go. And the term file 1, oh yeah, it's called test file. Okay, my fault. Layer 8 problem. And let's try again. F5. Yeah, this is Copilot, right? Hallucinating and inventing parameters that don't exist.
Yeah,
Happens quite often.
Blame it on Copilot. Right.
Okay, so here we go. The output in PowerShell 7 is a bit weird. So there is usually sometimes a bit more when compiling or when calling the LCM. And sometimes PowerShell 7 eats up the output. So if you expect something to be more in the output, please call the stuff in PowerShell 5. I have also made a note in the instructions regarding that. But what we have now is the MOV file. And let's have a look into the MOV file. How does it look like?
Don't do this at home. Don't look at MOV files.
You usually don't have to, right? Just to make you aware of what happened.
So MOV is managed object format, if I remember correctly. And then that's an old way of serializing data. So that's a way that the machine can understand. And at the time, which was before JSON was even a thing or something popular, that was the way, the cheap way, I would say, for Microsoft to be able to serialize a configuration document in some ways.
Yeah. You see, the data that we have here is also available on the right-hand side, but just in a very different look and feel, right? So writing MOV files yourself would be pretty painful, and therefore we are really, very thankful that we can create the configuration in PowerShell and have an automatic translation into MOV. And the good thing, of course, is as well that a configuration is pretty much the same like a function, so you can use all the PowerShell language features to, for example, duplicate this with a for each loop to 10 files or something. Yes. Okay, so if this worked, then we go to, let's make it in PowerShell 5 to not get trouble with the output.
So running as administrator.
Yes, which is default.
Which is important because you're going to change the system configuration. And then I won't go into the details, but.
And then we have to point it to a path. Where are my MOV files? In here. We want to put the task usually starts in the background, so you don't have any interaction. So let's put it into the foreground by using the weight parameter. And a verbose and force can't hurt. And here we go. So we get, let me see, what is the error? Yeah, we have a source path. Let's change the source path to be...
Oh, you've got both. No, you've got the contents already at the bottom. So you had two. Because we
Copilot.
Just used what Copilot did and then we didn't check. He tells us, well, that doesn't work. Because you try, it's like, you have parameters and then you have two parameters that you can't use at the same time. So we just tried to do it at the same time. That was the error message that actually we had. So now you run it again and that just test. Because if it's already there, we don't need to do anything, but it wasn't there, so it started to do the set. That's the idempotency we discussed earlier with the get, test, set.
So if we run the same command again, then we see it just skips the set because obviously the test method returned a positive value. Yeah, and no action is required. Most community DSC resources are much more talkative and tell you exactly what parameters they have tested, which parameters are in sync and out of sync. Unfortunately, the file resource does the very minimum. It just says, okay, destination object was found and no action is required. And if something is off, then the action is required, but it doesn't tell you why, right? Yeah, that is creating a file using these couple of lines.
Back to the slides. If you can.
Yeah, machine, but luckily we don't need the machine now. We go back to the slides.
Yeah.
Yes.
Next. Again. So now, if you want to do this on your machine, you can. Do you want to do it? It's just we took some time to explain it. Basically, you will write the configuration, you will compile the MOV, you will apply the MOV to the machine, to your machine, which is just going to create this. Can you go back actually and clean it up?
Clean it up.
Clean it up. Clean the machine.
Oh, I can.
Just to show.
If I can access it. No.
So feel free to start. We're just going to show you afterwards how to clean up the configuration. We're going to try if we can get back to
you can start and I will try to figure out how we can connect to it again. I think this one kicked in one more time.
Another 40 minutes before the break, I believe.
Okay. Come on. The resolution changed. Here we go. No, it's still there. Where am I connected to? Android AP.
You can.
Is the machine, wait a minute, running? Oh, come on.
Yeah, it was running.
And we have the inbound connection.
So the reason we show you this example, it's very easy to reproduce on your laptop. You need nothing else than what's already on your laptop, if you have a Windows laptop, obviously. And once you've done this, then doing the same thing for an Entra ID group is exactly the same principle, which will be the next step anyway.
Yeah, if this doesn't work, then I have to do it from my local machine, which would have been a better idea anyway. I thought these are more reliable. Let me. I will stop it and start it again.
Oh, you want to restart it?
Yeah, something is wrong.
It's not started, is it? Oh yes,
It's
is.
running.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's running. Yeah, restart. And then you can go, hold on, we've done this. We hands on two. Oh yeah, then you need to go this and that.
So let's see. There's maybe something wrong with the access point. Let's
No, you were connected, I'm pretty sure.
How about secured? Works fine.
That was punchy, so that's not a problem.
Now it works again.
Okay. Computers.
Oh man. You see, it restarted.
Yeah.
Again. Very unfriendly. Let's show you some more bits.
Sorry. Computer says no.
Yeah, this is funny. I have about 5 Azure machines, Windows 11, and they are all crashing constantly. It's not nice.
Do it locally.
Yeah, I guess so. Let's give it one more
still
chance.
works in PowerShell 7, it just doesn't show the output.
Yeah.
That's the only difference if you do it in 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess it's using implicit remoting for that.
Yes, implicit routing. So it in the back it starts a PowerShell 5 to do it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
created the file.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Yeah, if you have PowerShell 7 by default and you design PowerShell 7, it's not working. Well, actually, it probably is.
So we have also the commandlet get DSC configuration if you just want to have a view about what you can expect from the LCM to do. And if you want to know if your machine is in the desired state, you do a test DSC configuration. And it returns just a Boolean value, true or false. In our case, it should be true, hopefully.
You're not in admin? Oh, yes, you are.
The client.
You're not in the same machine, right?
I am.
Okay, okay.
That's the demo 1. Yeah, I mean, what did this... Actually, I didn't read it, so what is it getting? Archive, file 1, yeah. $PS version table is... okay, good. Let's do this in 5. Zoom. Test DSC configuration. I know what is that? Start service, WinRM. It's the start type by default on a client machine or on a client SKU is set to manual. Therefore, the Windows Remote Management Service wasn't started. And now this should work. Here we go, true. And the very important switch is detailed, and then you get also some information about which resources are in and which ones are not in the desired state, right? And this is the same mechanic that happens for every DSC resource in your configuration when doing the normal process. First, do the test, then decide whether we want to enact it or not. Okay, and what do we have to do if you are done with your tests? Because get DSC LCM, no, get,
It's been a while.
it's been a while, GLCM. That's
Yes.
the shortcut. Get alias to GLCM is get DSC local. Okay.
I knew it.
So again, the full version of it, get DSC local configuration manager, and this LCM, the engine tells you, or the configuration of the engine tells us that it will apply the configuration every 15 minutes. So once we apply and monitor, yeah, so it
it's gonna
only
have-
will report.
It will apply the first time that you do it, and then it will monitor the configuration drift we discussed. So it's going to say, it's going to run the same thing as the test, basically, and say, well, am I still in the right state?
Yeah. Of course, we can change the mode, we can change the frequency, and we can also tell the DSC LCM to not continue the work by doing a remove DSC configuration document, and the stage we want to remove is current. So we are removing the current configuration, and from now on, there is nothing to do anymore. So if we do a get DSC configuration, that's
It
it,
doesn't exist.
right?
We're saying that because if you run the thing on your machine, then you probably want to also remove it afterwards when you've created the folder.
Indeed.
right. So let's move on. If you still want to do it, feel free to do it. You can do it at home as well. This one, there's no dependency. So we can go into the next step, which is pretty much doing the same thing, but with Entra ID, creating the group that we want, because we still want to manage, this tenant. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to have DSC resources to do that. And this one is not done in the DSC community, but there's a community in itself, I would say, with the Microsoft 365 DSC resource module. So this is what Raimund is showing right now.
So, but how can I go? I need to zoom out. Here are the resources. Then I can zoom in again. No, I can't. Then the pane disappears. Okay, so we have. Oh,
Oh, yeah, you're not showing.
we are still in presenter mode. That's better, hopefully. Okay. So here we have the main page, m365dsc.com, and they give you an overview about all the available resources, or first about the available workloads. One workload is Azure AD. Renaming stuff is expensive and error-prone, therefore it's still named Azure AD, even if it is now targeting Entra ID.
Thank you, marketing.
Okay, and here we have all the resources that are be able to export and control the configuration of an M365 Entra ID tenant. So it's a lot of stuff, and we don't want to go into the details here because it would simply not fit into the frame. But let's have a look at something very simple, which is AD group. AAD group, and it's there.
So the thing with the resources is, you remember when you write a script, you need to, first connect, then test, get what exists. Is this already in there? So instead of doing this and writing this your own, someone already created those resources. So then you can say, I want this group. And then you can be declarative, but the logic is done for you, and then you can consume that logic with the DSC resource. That's what the DSC resources is all about. You have something that you can reuse. It's an abstraction, so you can say, I want this, and then get the result.
And by the way, question?
Sorry, I just want to ask with bicep now and the Entra piece, is that that's like another way of doing this too, though, right?
Probably yes. There's
Probably
probably
yes,
many ways to do it. The question is which one supports which configuration, and then how do you want to integrate that with other things?
Yeah. Yeah, in this space, we have many technologies with overlapping features and functionality sets. Yeah. So, by the way, writing these resources is not necessarily fun, because interacting with the graph command sometimes is a bit hard to do, and with the graph API even more. And just look at the number of parameters that we have. Right? So, I mean, and this is not the worst commandlet or the worst resource. There are resources with many more parameters that you all need to take into account, validate, pass to the right commandlet, and so on. So, having someone done this work already is a very big advantage, because you can start right away without even thinking about how you would do it with the Graph API or the Graph commandlets. And you have also nice little examples and code snippets that get you going. So if we want to have at the module here a view on this, then let's do a get DSC resource. Module is Microsoft 365 DSC. Let's put it in X. And while this is working, let's raise another question. How do we authenticate against the Entra ID tenant? What are the options?
So to go back a little bit, when you start doing the configuration of the file, when you did start DSC configuration on the MOF, it's not your PowerShell session that is running the code. Mm-hmm. It's actually communicating to the Windows service we discussed, the LCM, and it says, hey, there's a new MOF, go get that MOF, apply it and execute it, but it's the system process. So now think about what we just done and then what we're trying to achieve here, which is configuration something in Azure, and you remember that we've done it in PowerShell earlier.
Yeah, so what ways of authentication do jump into our mind? So we already used the user account interactively, which fails, right? Doesn't work. Then we have the app with a secret. Is that a good idea?
Certificates.
Right, certificates are much better. What's even less painful than an app and a certificate? Managed identity, right? So you have your worker in Azure as a virtual machine, and it has an identity, gets all the permissions. That's even better. Yeah, secret, certificate, managed identity. That's it. So. If we have let's write a configuration. Let's start right away with writing a configuration that does it. We have a video for that, but I think it's a little bit more, learning effect is better if we do it in here. So we do a configuration test group 1, 2, 3. And we have to tell it that my language is PowerShell. So we do a control space for IntelliSense. It loads all the available resources, and that wasn't very successful. Resources are missing. So the first thing you have to do if you want to use the resources from another module is you need to import it manually. There is no module auto-loading like in the normal PowerShell session. So we do an import DSC resource, and the module that we want to use is Microsoft 365 DSC. And from now on, we are having a much bigger selection of resources, as we can see here. So all the stuff is appearing here. And here we have also our AAD group resource. Here it is.
So space, and then give it a name. For
one little thing. Where did we do this? Here. So let's do this one more time again, but we want to have the name of the resource AAD group. Now, as the stuff is in the cache, it should be much faster. Yes, here it is. And then we can add the syntax switch, and it gives us an idea how we can talk to the resource. What are the parameters? What are the mandatory parameters? And what are the types? And we see we have 4 mandatory parameters that are not in square brackets. So we can copy them and move them over into our VS Code session. So this is test group 1, test group 1, 2, 3. And here are my parameters. So let's make it fairly easy. No, like that. The mail nickname is mail enabled. Mail enabled is $false. The mail nickname is Copilot. Yes, good. And security enabled is true. Perfect. So.
Same as we did before.
Yeah, no difference. James. Okay.
Is it right now? Okay, I thought we had another 15. Okay.
Let's just finish this task. It takes maybe 1, 2, 3 minutes.
And then we have time to try it, get some food, and then try it.
Okay, so no difference to what you have seen already, except the resource is different, and of course the parameters. So the next thing we do is we compile this test group 1, 2, 3. Output path is c/DSC. And then we just hit the run button, F5. And here we have the localhost morph. That's it. Okay, let's save the configuration. Desktop, group. And what's the next thing we want to do? Right. Start DSC configuration. The path again is cDSC. Wait, verbose, and false. It works. So easy. Didn't. Okay, failed to execute the test. It couldn't even test it. With error message, you must specify either the credential or application ID, tenant ID, certificate thumbprint. So why wasn't this marked as mandatory if we obviously need them? The concept of parameter sets is not available in DSC. So therefore, we can't kind of dynamically define which parameters are required and which ones are not. So this is something that we just found out by trial and error. So let's do the food first, and then we continue this and make this working.
So what's missing here is the authentication, right?
Yes, the authentication is missing.
So we give you a break, and then after that, we will explain how you do the authentication, and then you will be able to do it on your laptop.
By the way, the interesting stuff is yet to come, right? The whole pipeline stuff. This is just the basic DSC that gives you an idea how the background works, but the interesting stuff is yet to come.
Once you know how that works, everything will be done in YAML, and you don't have to write any DSC anymore, and then you will make the changes, you will create the groups by just changing a YAML. So that's what we're going to do in the second half of it, and you will see the end-to-end pipelines.
How long is the break, by the way?
15.
15?
I think so. Is that 15 minutes, right? Okay, so Raimund, what happened? You had some errors when you were trying to run the configuration.
I want to get it. The question from the gentleman at the back. He asked, you're not managing groups and group membership with DSC.
By that, I guess you meant we're not using the DSL, we're not compiling the morph, we're not doing this. So, and Michael said, well, initially he didn't know where we were going forward, but we show you all the steps on how to do it. Because after, when you understand the principle, we're not going to use this anymore. We're going to augment the abstraction. So you remember we had the GUI, then we had the script, now we have the DSC, DSL, and then we can abstract this again further away. And if you see, every time we do one step, we go back and we look at the limitations of the solution and what works and what we manage to improve. This is the out-of-the-box DSC. There will be a step further. I don't want to say too much, but basically there's a step further where we're going to solve most, not all, but most of the limitations that we are facing. So again,
if it would be just this, then it's definitely a fail.
We've done it. So we've done it. We've been using DSC for many, many years.
Yeah.
We started like this. And at some point, I don't know if you remember Stephen Morawski, and then he was showing something in 2016, and so I was not there in 2016, but I had to look at the recording and then pause, because he didn't explain everything, and I was just recording, and I had to pause every few seconds to understand everything going on. And that's how the next project you're going to see ended up. But the first part was in 2016. So
good. Again, this was the last command, and it resulted in
a sea of red.
Yes, a sea of reds in. Okay, wrong PowerShell. And wrong PowerShell. Yeah. And bigger. Here it is. Okay, so we need to specify credentials. At least we need to specify an app ID. We need to have a tenant ID, and we need to have either credentials or the certificate thumbprint. And you know the drill, right? What you do is you create a credential object. PS credential. We call the constructor, and the username is just empty. And the password, what was the password? Do we still have did I do this locally? No, I didn't. Okay, so where is my file it was in? This mouse drives me crazy. \m.
No, it's D.
It was D, yeah. cdd \m.
Is it M or is it DSC? Oh no, yes.
That one. Okay, so the pass was... wait a minute, is PowerShell 7 maybe remembering my password that I typed in here? $pass...
No, it restarted.
Yeah, but
Yeah, even the
I
string.
was hoping that there is some kind of caching here.
Nope, nope.
No. Okay. So this time we are making a note. So the password is...
I'll help you.
thank you. Is...
Sorry, it's
ZV...
www.
3 W's? Yeah. Okay, pipe convert to secret string. Okay, and then we do a get content
GC
off. What was
Row.
it? Cred. Raw. And we pipe this to convert from YAML, put it in C for content.
YAML you
Doesn't
didn't finish.
work.
You didn't finish YAML.
Convert from.
It just doesn't know.
Maybe it's only available here. Oh, crap.
Crappity crap. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this was the encrypted secret, and we pipe it to unprotect datum.
Yep.
Unprotect datum, and the password is...
$.
Okay, so let's store this somewhere. Temp. So,
Just in case we need it later.
yeah, because the machine tends to crash.
All right.
So, then, let's go back to VS Code, and we put the password in here. No, brackets, password, convert to secret string. That looks okay-ish. Yeah, okay. So it reminds me that it's not a good idea to put plain text credentials in script files. We know that. We're just in a development environment. So the next thing is we need to have our tenant ID. So the tenant ID is, and we have that in the file, which is there. There is the tenant ID. Next thing is we need to have the application ID, which is also on the file, on the very top. Nope, always want to use tab here. And then we have the credential object, which goes into application secret.
So now we've specified all the information so then we can authenticate with this ID the same as we did with PowerShell earlier, but within the DSC process. Remember, the DSC process is running as system on the machine.
So pressing F5 creates a new MOV file. Bad. Now it doesn't even want to create the MOV file. So it tells me property application secret. Converting and storing encrypted passwords of plain text as plain text is not recommended. So it refuses to comply with our order.
Don't do this in production.
Yeah. And Gael mentioned that the solution that we are going to demonstrate is another abstraction layer on top of DSC. This is why I always have to peek in the internet to find out how to get rid of the error message, because I use DSC only maybe every month once, right? Usually we only deal with the YAML files.
This part.
Because
if you build your solution abstracting this away, as we will show you in 20 minutes, then you don't need to run this anymore. But you need to understand what's happening under the hood. So then you understand the logic. So how do you get rid of this?
Wait a minute, there is a DSC demo. So the DSC demo contains this hash table. this configuration data hash table that sets the PS-DSC allow plain text password to true. As mentioned, not recommended, but sometimes, especially in a dev environment, absolutely necessary to reduce complexity.
Yeah, by default, DSC says you should not use plain text password, but we want to say, trust me, bro, it's safe, so we just put that one in.
Okay, configuration data, CD. And if we run the script again with this, I think maybe we need to have a node property here. Configuration, and then we have our node, which is localhost. And within,
yes.
And then sometimes the comfort is getting in the way.
This is the DSL that we said we're not going to use later because we don't even remember how to use it.
And, come on, magically
there we
works.
go.
Yeah. And if we have a look into the file, then DSC, localhost mof, then we immediately see why it's not a good idea. There is my password. And of course, I can easily relate this to the application ID, which is here, right? So that's a big don't.
Yes, because anyone with access to the file has access to the security. And you know, when we told you how to encrypt the password, and then you've already tried, and then you've already created all the groups. You know, that's what any attacker, if he finds this mof file, then it's not encrypted, and they could just use it. So don't do this at home.
Okay.
So now you're executing this DSC morph. You say, well, we did that for the file resource on the machine earlier. No, in this morph file, the new morph file we just built, we have the same kind of things, but to create the group, but not on the local machine, but in Entra ID. What's happening?
Again.
See red.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here. So it tells me, please provide the tenant name in this format, contoso.com, instead of a GUID. So what the heck, or why the heck, is it named then tenant ID and not tenant name? Right? So yeah, this is kind of a change in design, and this is why we have to go down, take the tenant name, and put the tenant name in here.
We'll get there.
Okay.
Compile again.
Compile again. New morph file has been created, and we are giving the new morph file to the LCM. And this time, hopefully, we are moving forward. Do we?
Sure.
Now the test takes longer. That's good.
It's a good sign. That means there's some communication with the APIs. The thing is running now, but we're actually not running anything locally. Well, we're not changing anything locally. It just calls, the APIs.
And by the way, I wanted to ask the question about the groups and DSC, right? So we are not managing group membership with DSC because what is the only way of communicating with an Entra ID and most of the services that Microsoft offers in the cloud? What's the main communication channel? It's a what? Graph API. So how long does a call to the Graph API take?
Super quick.
Yeah.
What about 200 calls?
Yeah. So
What about 100 and 1,000 sometimes, or maybe 100 or 1,000 calls if you need to check, which group does the group exist? Is the group with, who's in the group? Is that person with that property in the group? Does it have this access? So that's lots of calls that being called every time.
And we have customers trying to manage applications, and they have about 20,000 apps registered in Entra ID, and this doesn't really scale, right? So if you add the users, maybe 250,000, 500,000 users, plus the groups, plus whatever principles you have, then you are going into runtimes that are pretty much unfeasible. Right, so we need to focus here on configuration, on things that are, they can be a couple of thousand objects, but it needs to be in a kind of scenario that we can handle it, even talking through the API.
But the problem will be with any technology, if you try to manage, whether it's DSC or not DSC, that doesn't really matter. So whatever you're trying to achieve, even if it's one script, and then you try to get all the users and configure all the users, that's the number of calls you will have to do will be the same. You need to get the users, get the information from the users, making sure they're correct. So if you do one user at a time, it's okay. But if you have, let's say, 1,000 users, then you need to do all of those calls. So whatever you're using, at some point you need to abstract away so you don't do everything at once. Or maybe batch them in different servers. So then you have, some more throughput for those calls.
So one use case is, for example, controlling the administrative roles, that you have control about who is member of which critical role, right? We have a bunch of roles, but they are still in a kind of controllable number, but not the normal users and the normal groups. And here we can see that finally we are triggering the start method for group 1, 2, 3. Then it prints out all the properties that it knows about. And obviously it comes back with true, because we are skipping the test method. So this group was created previously by DSC in Entra ID, right? So what do you think about the whole process?
We've abstracted away the imperative, okay? So now we don't have to say, you need to execute this command, you need to authenticate this command. We just provide the information. And then we say, I want this group, make it so. So we've improved, right? Easy, isn't it? So now, why are you laughing?
Yeah.
Well, it's a bit challenging. So now imagine what you would have to do to manage, let's say, create 100 groups. So you have to go and have 100 entries, maybe. Or then you say, well, yeah, but you have the DSC, DSL, which means you can have a for each loop, and then you can go through each of the groups with the data, and then you can iterate through.
What we have forgotten is just this one. So the M365 DSC has a good feature to log all the changes and all the objects that are not in the desired state in the event log. Right? So as soon as something is not as expected, you have an event log entry containing all the details to identify the object and know what's not in the desired state. And we also have an export. But the export is not very intelligent. It exports into a flat file. So you have then one big PowerShell script containing all the information. And unfortunately, it's a PowerShell script and not YAML, JSON, something that we would expect as a data format, right? So there is export, but with limitations.
It's like if you do a get AD users, and then it exports a script file with the data of the users. You don't get the data, but you get the script file to create the data. So that's just to give you an idea of what you're getting back, which may not be the most...
better than nothing.
Yeah, better than nothing.
Yeah.
And then when you want to reverse engineering, at least you got the information. If someone did it through the GUI, then you would have nothing.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Okay, so we can skip the video. And then we have...
That's what you just did.
Takes a while. Come on.
Just go.
Here we go. Right?
Yes.
Yes.
So what we've just done, you can do this, create this DSC resource. It's exactly the same as you've done with the file. This one is the DSC resource, making sure that you put the right information, not like someone I won't name here. And then as soon as you manage to do this, you will create the group, and then you can also go into the interface, or we can go in the interface and find, get the groups, and then you will see that you've created the groups.
Yeah. How much time shall we allocate for that?
Let's go through the demo before, so then they can fire up the laptop. Who's run out of battery? Just of interest. Okay, no more battery. Almost? Okay, so we're gonna go through the demo quickly. So the problem we've seen so far is, okay, you done one group, but then managing one group, you have one entry. So if you want to add, that's you doing the demo.
Oh.
You want to scale out. You say, okay, one group, it's easy, it's like 10 lines. Now you want to have one group, maybe 2 groups, 3 groups. So
what would you do if you want to define 2 groups? For each. Okay. But what's the limitation of for each? Maybe if we want to have test groups that are iterated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then it's easy in the for each loop. But what if we want to have an input file? Then we need to have a parameter that reads the file and then iterates through that. Okay, that could be an option, right? Hash table? Hash table, yeah. Yes, hash table. And this is what DSC, by the way, has as a configuration data type, right? So DSC gets one big hash table, and then you can do whatever you want with the data in the hash table. So let's say we want to have a property here called users equals, and this is another, no, it's an array. And an array of hash tables, and we have the first hash table, which is first name equals test1, and last name equals also test1, that is fine. Come Copilot, please. Yeah. And then we have another hash table with test2. Okay, perfect. And what we can do then in here is we do a, but now there is a, I think it's a bit difficult in PowerShell because $configuration data dot users dot, and I think we need to get a numerator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you we're not doing this often.
Get a numerator.
You don't have to go into the details. It's going to be on the slide later.
But I mean, you see, it's not scalable.
We said we want to have something which is declarative on what are we doing right now. We're doing the imperative stuff we said you should not be doing, because then what's happening now is, okay, we have some declarative, but then because it's going to be too painful to just do copy-paste things every time, then we need to go again and then add some logic into there. And this is where, like, at some point, you want to avoid this logic.
Not at some point, very quickly.
Yes,
very quickly.
That's okay. Yeah. If you're the only one managing this configuration file, and then you have one configuration file, which is, I would say, maybe under 100 lines, 1,000 lines, it's easy to manage. You get two people working on it. Oh, that starts to be a bit, why have you changed this? And like, thankfully, there's a Git, and then you can get good working practice. You can go more than 1,000 lines, but basically, at some point, you're going to hit the limit. Your constraint will be, well, now it's not very practical. So how can we go and abstract away so we don't have to write imperative in the declaration?
And unfortunately, many companies, even Microsoft, have published solutions that are not scalable at all. I remember there was a solution accelerator for SharePoint, and it came with a 2,000-line script for the configuration and another 1,500 lines for the configuration data. And so it never worked correctly.
These days, when I see a script which is more than a few hundred lines, I just close it. I just can't be bothered. I'd rather rewrite it and make a module or something than just go through it. Can you go back to the slides?
Yes. Yeah. Let's.
So what happened with this one? Well, we tried to scale out, but that's a fail, right? Scaling out the out-of-box DSC is probably not really practical. So is DSC better? Well, yes, it's better than just using imperative PowerShell scripts. There's definitely advantages. So it's still repeatable. You can reduce the human-induced errors because they don't have to rerun the thing. So,
well, I would argue, if you use it like this, then DSC adds a lot of complexity without a very big advantage. So I've been with a couple of customers. I remember one British bank, and they said every time they use DSC to do a change to the Exchange infrastructure, they have an outage. So that's actually the opposite of what they wanted to achieve with DevOps, right? They were slower, they were even more error-prone and less predictable. So the whole project was a fail.
You still have some desired state abstraction, but as we've seen, there's a limitation that comes pretty quickly. And the limitations, well, we remove the imperative instructions. Some of it, as soon as you want to scale, you will have more imperative. The complexity is not scalable because at some point you have one script which is 1,000 lines, and then you have data, which is also 1,000 lines of configuration data in one big hash table. Like, this is not what many people do. I haven't seen many teams managing configuration data in big PSD1. At some point, people will say, well, why can't I do that in, I don't know, JSON, YAML?
CSV.
Depends on the companies.
It depends on the company. Yeah.
It's context sensitive. if you have imperative instructions, you need to understand what happened before. But it's much better than it was for the DSL. So you have some instruction, you say, I want this, and then it will happen. It's still hard to troubleshoot, though. As you've seen, even us, we've been using it for 10 years so. Some of the stuff we need to look for it if we do that out of the box. And then, as we've seen, there's no real separation between DSL and data, and we will get back into that very soon. And there's still a lot of manual interaction. What you've done so far is, and what we've made you do, and you will still do it a little bit, is creating the MOF, creating the configuration file. And then you need to compile it. You need to push it. Obviously, this is not practical. We know that in the company environment, you would do it one or twice, and then you say, well, I need to create a pipeline that does that for me. But you will see we will help you with that. And then there's not that much quality check. So as we've seen, what is the checks that, the data with the group already exists, or we've defined it twice. If we copy paste, we will soon have some issues where what has been defined twice. How do we check that that doesn't happen? So out-of-box DSC configuration data, as we've seen, it's a big hash table that we need to manage. Someone, Missy, which is not there, but I told her, she was on the slide. She wrote a very good article, and that was many years ago, which is what's the best way out of the box to manage configuration data. And we repeat out of the box because there's community solutions that we've built, well, I've built, and then that's not documented. If you look in Microsoft Docs, you won't see this information. So when we go around and we say, well, that's the way you should be doing it, and some people said, but that's much easier, but why is it in no documentation? Because it's not a Microsoft-provided approach.
But M365 DSC neither, but this is mentioned.
But that's not really Microsoft. It's within the Microsoft ecosystem because it's solution engineers. They provide M365 DSC. It's not Microsoft Redmond. Yeah. So that's a bit complex, but that's why make sure you talk to the community and then you will have the information. Oops, that's not what I wanted. So can you show us the pipeline? The full pipeline.
The full pipeline.
Because I believe many won't have much battery to do all the tests, so I would just want to make sure you batch all the tests.
Okay. So we open, wait a minute, first we store that. We open, so this one. Hello, come on. It's already open, but the wrong files.
Yeah, you just...
So here we go. So let's explain how to do a change first, right?
Yeah, let's just go. Okay, so we will take a shortcut and I'll show you everything you've done so far and we've made you do, you won't need to do it again.
Yeah.
But you understood that what's happening when you use DSC is you have to create a configuration file, you have the MOF, and then you have something, the LCN, that execute the MOF and then propagate the changes into Entra ID. Okay, that's how the thing works. But obviously, you won't do that manually every time. So what if someone created a pipeline, so then you can use the pipeline or you use the scripts automation to run that for you? And what if on top of this, we didn't have to manage the configuration data in a big PSD1 file and then manage the configuration with the DSL, and you could just specify the information into YAML files and then just say, well, let's just make it so. So that's what we're going to show you is, what if we had the infrastructure and the tenant that we want to manage?
What do you think? How many layers of data do you need if you want to describe an Azure infrastructure?
Who used Puppet before? Puppet, anyone? No? Okay, because there's a very...
Well, let's go back to the old on-prem world. In an on-prem world, how many layers of data did we have there? So usually you have a baseline, right? All your servers should get a certain baseline, should be configured exactly the same way. What comes on top of the baseline? What's the next level of specification?
Is it a file server?
Just a wild guess, some server. Pardon? No, from a configuration aspect. So we have the baseline. But what makes, let's take the example of a file server. What makes a file server a file server? file system, the name, the role, right? So the file server has a role. What makes the file server specific to a certain location, right? So you'd have a location layer. A file server in New York might look different than in Munich or Berlin because IP addresses are different, maybe even the access data is different. Maybe you have a snowflake, but a kind of intended snowflake because this particular server has an exception. So we have the most highest layer, which is the node itself, right? So we go from the baseline to a more specific layer. And if we think about Azure, how many layers could we have here? So it also depends on the company and the use case, but in this sample, we come up with 2 layers. So we have the baseline that is applicable to all tenants, and then we have a tenant-specific baseline, because maybe you are controlling, let's say, a dozen tenants. Application tenants, some production tenants, test tenants, dev tenants. We want to have the baseline all the same, so we all want a certain conditional access policy being existing in all our tenants. But in a dev tenant, we want to be much more relaxed than in a test tenant and even in a production tenant, right? So we have the same data everywhere, but we can control what are the differences between a certain object. So 2 layers.
If we go back to what Bill, the guy we're trying to help, was trying to do, he said, well, we already have something, and we want to do something very similar, but it's a new environment. So we have very big similarities, but obviously the name, because it's a new entity, the name is going to be different. Something's going to be different. So you need to have a layer, and then you need to be able to change very specific things. So how do you represent this in data? And this is what we're going to show you now.
Yeah. So here we have the layer that is for all tenants, number 1, and for the environment, which is either dev, prod, or test, number 2. And you can have as many tenants, as many environment layers as you want.
It's a hierarchy of information.
Yeah. So let's say we want to, in all tenants, we want to create a group. So we go to the workload that we want to do the change in, Azure AD.
The groups are configured in Azure AD or Entra AD.
Yeah, and here's the group. Okay, so what do we do in order to create a new group here? We just do the change. By the way, before doing any change in a Git repository, what do? What's always the first step? Pardon? Branch, right.
There will be a session about mastering Git collaboration by us on day 4.
So, new branch, demo group, or whatever we want to name it. Then we have created our group. And here's our change.
Hold on. Is it not the same names?
Oh yeah, let's make it
This is why you have code review.
100, ooh.
Or pair programming, that helps as well.
So the mouse is driving me crazy because the table is tilted and the mouse is always losing its position. Sorry for that. Okay, that's it. And this should be present. Okay, so we can make sure that an object will be removed or will be created. Okay, so that's it. Then we check in that file. We use Copilot to make a description for the change.
Amazing.
Copilot says we are adding group 101. Perfect, that's right, commit it. And is there anything else we should do before actually pushing a change to a repository? Pardon? This?
Say it louder.
Test it.
Test, yeah.
That would be good.
So let's see. How can we test if our solution still works? The only thing we have to do is we go to the console and...
Go to the button.
What is it?
No, that's fine.
And we run the build script.
Okay, let's run the build.
But we need to be in the right directory, of course. So it's dm, here it is. And then we do a build. So, and the build will do all the necessary steps to verify my data, create the artifacts, pack the artifacts in a format that our target system understands them, and then we're done. Right? That's the local build pipeline.
Which is why everything you've done so far, you don't need to do it ever again, because there's a pipeline that does that for you.
And then we have something like RSOP. Do you guys remember the term RSOP from the old days?
resultant set of policies.
Yeah, so we didn't have it in datum from day one. We came to the idea, I don't know,
Because it was a
19th?
pain to see what changed in files. So
Yeah.
then now we say, well, what if we get, these different layers, and then at some point you have to merge them. So you want to have the merge that you had yesterday, and then you want the merge that you had today, and then you could see what has changed. So then that's another way to help you find out what has changed between two versions.
And it's quite funny, Microsoft didn't came up with RSOP from day one as well. So group policy in 2000 did not have RSOP. I think it was added in 2003 because of all the pain to know how the merging works. So, and here we have our output folder with all the artifacts that we need, for example, RSOP. There is even RSOP with source, so that we know from which layer a certain setting is coming from.
So you
Right.
merge the different files together, and then you see where it's coming. Which
Okay.
is good to have this information, but it's crap because this is not proper YAML. But it's a
Yeah,
detail.
with source is not, the other one is.
Yes, that's why we've got the two types.
So let's not wait for this to finish, because we are very sure we are good developers, right? We are sure, good system engineers, we know that we don't make mistakes. So we just push. Oh, come on, I think it just crashed.
Open, do it.
No.
Oh, is the VM like crashed
VM.
again? It's only the 10th times today. Thank you, Azure VM.
Okay, let's see, can we connect to it again? No.
No, so we need to wait for it to restart. Okay, go back to the slide in the meantime.
Have it? Yeah, it did. Okay. Haven't? Okay. Let me just go to F5. I think also there
the
is the error
internet?
message.
I know.
Internet is fine, but if I want to reconnect, I need to make sure that the inbound rules are available. Which network are we connected to? Android, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, the rules disappeared. So let me add them quickly, and then we need to get to the slides because this takes about 30 seconds at least to apply.
So far, just to sum up, is changed just the description in the YAML file to say, well, that's the data I want to change. I want to create a new group. Now we're trying to do a pull request into the system that's already in place. And the systems will see, well, there's a change to the file. So we will recompile this information and we will deploy this into Azure, obviously only if the compilation works, which is compiling on his machine, so that should just work. And then, the machine is not there anymore.
What we do is, because this change wasn't very difficult to do,
Yeah,
we
you-
just clone the repository and do it locally. I think this is much more efficient.
Yes. So in the changes done, and I want to highlight something, we changed something in the YAML. So everything you've done in the last 2 hours, you don't need to do it if you just know that, well, that's a group with its name, with this information. I just want to do it again. So someone who doesn't know DSC can make the same change as Raimund just did. What you've done in the last 2 hours, if you ask someone who's never used PowerShell and doesn't really know about the technology, PowerShell, DSC, and these things, it's actually not that easy to make. But changing a YAML file in 2025, I think that should be on everyone's list. If you've never done that, if you start a job, that's probably something you do in the first week.
And it's YAML, not JSON or PSD1, right? YAML is so user-friendly.
Almost.
Cloning. Pardon?
Yes.
Yes, that's the only
But
problem.
there's extensions for that.
Okay, let's make the font bigger. Let's do the same change here. So we go again to, no,
Did you push? Because
it,
maybe
does,
it's already pushed.
it doesn't work.
You didn't push?
I mean, let's double check. Branches. No,
No.
it crashed earlier. So G1, and then let's go to all tenants, Azure AD, groups, close that. Oh, just that. And change that to 101.
1 or 2.
Or, yeah, let's take it to,
You got 1 or 2.
and I maybe have it already. Let's change it to 777. Okay, so here is our change.
Yep.
We, pardon? Ensure present. Thank
Thank you. Someone's following.
Present, and we use Copilot. Nice message. Commit it, publish. So what's the next step? What do I have to do to make my work visible? That's it?
Who's using Git at work and collaborate with Git?
So what do you do if you have done a change to a branch and you want... And this starts with pull request, right. So, and Azure DevOps knows about my change, so it suggests to do a pull request from the G1 branch. It contains the description, and then we press the create button. Okay. So, because my team doesn't trust me, what do they do? Of course, a code review, but before even doing the code review, exactly. So they do a build, right? So the build was triggered because if the build fails, then I don't even need to look into the content because obviously this guy has done something wrong. So let's prove that our content is right first, that all the tests have been done right, and then we ask Gael to do the code review.
I'm not going to spend any time if he hasn't tested, like, I don't know if he's tested it on his machine. And you know that he hasn't because it didn't work, right? So I won't trust that, and I won't spend time until either he's asked me to look at it because he thinks it's okay, or maybe he wants to discuss. But otherwise, I'm just going to wait for the build to finish. And if it's green, that means he's doing something right. And then maybe I need to go and look what the change is.
And the output should look pretty familiar. So exactly the same output that we had in PowerShell is now appearing here in the Azure DevOps worker. So most of the complexity is not done in the pipeline because debugging a pipeline is always painful. So we use invoke build, that is a tool to kind of express yourself. Task runner
is the same kind of thing. It's just a task runner. It's just a way so that you can create a task, and then the task might be importing some modules. But basically, it's a way so then you can say, I'm going to create a pipeline, which is this task, then this task, then this task, and then it just runs it for you and format the output a little bit.
Okay, and this is, I think, an initial run, and therefore it copies the modules first.
Yes.
We don't have to wait for that, but that's it. As a participant, as a user of the DSC solution, the only thing you need to do is do your change in YAML, push it to the repository, create a pull request, and then you're done.
So if you understand this, and you will understand this, then if someone says, well, I would like you to create me another group for my app, and that might be someone from helpdesk, that might be someone from network, you don't have to say, well, I'm going to do it for you. No. Well, this is the repository, you know YAML, you copy paste, you do a pull request. If the pull request builds, then I will do the review, and maybe if I'm happy with your change, I will prove it. So you enable a self-service scenario. Because you abstract away the DSC DSL that you don't want anyone to learn about it. And basically the DSC DSL is still used in there, but because it's abstracted further, like a bit deeper, no one writes, or almost no one writes using that DSL anymore.
So this is why sometimes we are struggling because we are not touching DSC at all.
We just use that pipeline, and this pipeline is the repository that you cloned when you were doing this exercise. So you already have it. And then you can run the build, you can run it locally. And if you don't change anything, it should be doing about everything on your machine. Pulling the dependencies from the PowerShell gallery, building the artifacts, creating the MOFs, and everything's ready. So you will have to add the specifics to your tenant, so the tenant ID configurations and things like that. But beyond that, like, everything's already pretty much done for you. You change the data, obviously, to what you want, and you have a good status pack, so then you can have your pipelines.
Let's show this here. So this is it's the same project, but targeting 3 tenants. So we have in source exactly the same data. And in global, we have the Azure YAML, which defines the tenants we want to contact. And here we go. So for our dev environment, which you can freely name as you like, here we have the connection data, then comes test, then prod.
why do you have your secrets in there?
Oh,
Obviously,
Mistake.
you should not use that, but there's ways to,
that's funny.
there's
actually,
ways
it's
to
not.
remove it, but in this case, I just saw that. And I said,
Yeah, there is a bug
it's
in the
good for the
setup.
recording, if you see what I mean.
There is obviously a bug in the setup because in our other project, I hope it looks better. Global Azure.
Yeah, it's okay.
No. Yeah, here's but this is not okay. So this
Yes.
should be an encrypted string like you have it in your YAML file, right? So obviously I did something wrong with setting up the solution. Need to fix the scripts.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
And then the pipeline, of course, also adapts to that and looks like a couple of more steps. Looks like this. So we are building for all environments in parallel. And then we are applying in the dev environment first. We are validating if the configuration could have been applied successfully. And only if this is the case, then we are applying in test, testing in test, and then usually we have a gate. So a manual approval process to move forward to prod. And the approval process will only be started if the test previously was fine.
Go back to the slides.
Yes.
So I'm just going to sum up what we've seen before you go back to doing the last, this hands-on. So what happened is locally you say, I want to change, I want to add a new group. I was not on the right thing. So you made the change to the YAML file. You say, well, I want this group, I copy, paste the YAML, and then I create it. Probably there's some linting going on there. So probably I said I use the YAML extension because sometimes I just can't see the space and then I just want some help. Then I run the build just to make sure, well, does it build? And that's the first validation that the compilation works. So you have the right parameters, you're not missing a mandatory parameter, like you have the first level of feedback. Before you even commit, push, or anything, you just want to make sure that you're not doing something stupid. So the quicker you've got your feedback, so if you can run it on your local machine, that means you can get very quick feedback to say, well, that looks correct. And then you stamp it with a version to say, well, you know, that's on my Git repository and I know what's the last tag. I'm just trying a new configuration. So it will automatically generate a version. And we will now run some tests. Like we've made a change. Is the change coherent? Does that make sense? Are we adding a group which is already in the configuration? Maybe at a different layer or something. So we need to validate and then again, build trust in what we're doing. So again, you're doing that on your local machine. This is all the local machine. So you're building trust in your thing before you start doing the commit. And when you've done the commit, you can finally push either to your fork, like if you're collaborating with the HTTP repository, or just a different branch as Raimund did earlier. So
And by the way, the number of tests in this demo solution is just a minimal set of tests, right? So
yes.
You write a test in case of facing an error. So if you've done something wrong, you don't want to run into the same error again and again and again. So you write a pester test, which is actually a couple of lines of code usually, because you have the configuration data in the hash table anyway. So you just need to get the data that you want to test for and then fail if your conditions are not satisfied.
A good example. Everyone had a colleague that would never respect the naming conventions, right?
Yeah.
So now, every time they're trying to do something without taking care of this naming convention, you make sure that there's a test that validates the naming convention. And then if he's doing wrong, it's not going to build properly. And then everyone will see, well, he made a change, but we're not going to even look at the PR because it didn't build. So what happens when you push the commit, you create the pull request, and then there's a CI job that starts, as you've seen in the pipeline. And what happens is this agent, it will do a git checkout, it will get what's in the repository, it will build it, it will stamp again with a version to say, well, you know, we're building this version. It will run the tests. And if the test pass, and this is what's happening at the moment in the build agent, in Azure DevOps, if everything works, oh, I'm not on the right button. If everything works, the build is going to be validated. And then it will say to the PR, no more battery. I got the same problem and my CMOS battery is dead. So. Stop playing at the back. Thank you. So if the CI job passes, that means like we're getting trust, like this PR is something that we can review because it passes the job. So it will tell to the PR, well, you know, this check passed. So maybe there's another check especially if it's Raimund. So you want to review this, right? So that's another gate, an approval gate. And if that's okay, that looks good, this makes sense, then after that, what we can do is take the change that has been made and we will merge to main, which is the main branch of the Git repository. So we merge this, and that will trigger a new job, which this one will actually deploy the way we want. So in the CI job, maybe if you advance a little bit more your test, you can validate the test that it deploys to a temporary or like a draft environment. But then the CI job will actually start the same thing, check out, build, version, test, and starts the deployment. And the deployment is usually handled a bit separately. In this case, you can see that the pipelines are made directly. So you can see we'll do dev, test, prod. But that's what's happening. When you have a deployment pipeline, as soon as you're happy with the changes, it will start deploying to the different rings. And you can see as different ring where you have dev, and then you will start deploying to dev. If everything's fine in dev, then it will carry on the process. There's no issue, and then you can have whatever logic to build trust. Maybe it has to be one day without an issue before you go to the next stage, the next ring. And then you will start the deployment to test. And then if that happens and there's no issue for 1 week, let's say, then you want to deploy that to prod. That will change depending on your business, depending of how much trust you have in your system. But what's important is that's the automation. Remember of the automation fear cycle. Make sure you're not doing anything outside of this automation. And then make sure you do and you invest into building the trust. And the quicker you can trust and deploy to prod, the better. Not just go, well, it's fine, it's Friday, I'm not scared, let's make the change. It's just build trust so that you and others trust in the changes. Do you want first to see if the changes pop?
Let's see.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Are we trusting our pipeline? Wrong project. Obviously it worked.
Yeah.
So perfect. Let's go to Entra.
So it was test group 777, if I remember correctly.
By the way, while this is loading, there is also a pipeline for the export that automatically gets created, and the export pipeline, which some customers run on a regular basis to have a kind of snapshot of their environment, and you automatically get the, no, that's the wrong view. There,
yeah.
No, that's the test artifact, sorry. Where are the artifacts?
You had it before.
Ah, there it is. Published artifacts, and the published artifacts, there we have one artifact per tenant, and here we have one YAML file for each configuration. There is no YAML file for the group settings because this is empty as far as I know. Application security details, yeah, okay. So also export works in the pipeline and doesn't have to be done manually. So let's go to Entra ID. There it is. Groups, all groups. Where is it? A bunch of test groups. Did we give them the right name? Refresh. Oh.
Are you the right tenant, by the way?
Yes, because there are all the other test groups that participants have done. So let's have a look at the pipeline. What did the pipeline do? Push. There is start. So this is now the...
Oh, we haven't approved the PR.
Oh,
sorry.
Come on.
We went too far.
We went too far. Right, so let's have a look at the PR. So the PR could be built, right? So now we know that everything is fine because the build was successful. But as Gael explained, this PR validation, of course, should not make a deployment. It's only the build validation. So now, let's say I'm the manager of the guy who did the change. I go to files. I see the update of the files. I approve that and I'm quite happy with that, so I can set it to complete. Or I can set it to autocomplete to give the ball back to the creator of the PR. So let's make a complete. We do a squish commit, delete the branch afterwards because it is no longer necessary. And, oh, first I have to approve. Approve, complete,
Yeah, it's because it's you.
Yeah, because it's me. So what do we do?
You don't have another account?
No, I don't. But let's say
change the security in this case, just for the
yes.
demo.
So we go to branch policies.
This is a good setup. You should not change the setup as Raimund is about to do.
Allow requester to approve their own changes. Right? That's pretty bad.
But for the example, you understand
It
that you
works.
should not be doing this.
Yeah. So let's see.
If your colleague does that, you know you're gonna smack it at the back of the hand.
Let's see.
Just get your colleague to do the pull request and then you approve it.
Yes, yes. But
Master.
yeah, just push to master. But okay, so joking apart,
Yeah.
doing pull requests is good, obviously, to have someone that double checks. But I use it mostly because it's a communication tool.
Yeah.
You are making a change, and this is your intent that we said earlier. Like, why are you doing this change? And then if you just push to main, then no one else knows that you've pushed that to main, and they don't know why you've done it. And maybe they would have asked a question that you didn't document. If someone does that, like, Raimund, why have you changed this? Oh, yes, I need this group for this application. It's like, yeah, but you didn't put that into the request. So that's why the pull request is important. So then use that as a communication tool, not just for security vetting or whatever.
And always give context, right? Just saying I've done this change is not enough. I've done this change is usually the content of a commit message, but the pull request should be the context and the purpose of the changes.
Especially when someone auto-generates with AI the commit messages.
Yeah,
Just saying.
like I do all the time.
Exactly. Don't do it.
Okay, let's go to the slides. And
Have you approved the PR and then it's
I
running?
did, it's running.
So know that, as you've seen earlier, you remember we have the job is for the PR. The PR says, well, the check is okay, he approved it, we merged, now the next job is running, so then it will actually do the same thing again and then deploy the changes. So the fully integrated pipeline, yeah, you can stay here, you can do the work actually, be fine with me. Now we have history because we have everything in Git, and then we have self-service. We can say, well, if you want to know the group for whatever usage you have access to the YAML file. We abstract away the DSL or the DSC specific. You don't need to learn DSC, but you can come and contribute. And that's easy. And even the network team who doesn't know a thing about maybe M365 or Entra ID, they can also contribute to that, which is very useful. If they don't want to learn this Azure stuff, but they need to integrate, I don't know, with authentication provider or something like this. We've got compliance because we know who changed what, who approved it. You can add this compliance built in from the collaboration process that Git offers on everything in YAML files.
How do you get this information nowadays? How can you kind of go back in time and identify who has done a certain change and who approved it?
If you work so I worked a lot in financial services, and at least in Europe, it's mandatory to have this information, especially in Germany, actually, I believe, these days. So you need to have this. And then sometimes people need to engineer a process, well, if they were using Git to drive the changes, they say, well, it's just there. And then it's actually the right way of collaborating. So you have compliance built in this process.
And not need to go through a ticket database
Yes.
and find out what the ticket was.
And you don't need a change board, a change advisory board, just for saying, well, are you making sure that you register this information in the compliance document, which is a word on this file share? No, it's in Git. You want to know, just git log all the changes, and then you have the references to all the PRs. You can see that the PRs run.
But
you
what
have the
if the
output artifacts as well.
What if the compliance team requires it as a Word document or PDF or even print it?
No, usually I know that audits, they want screenshots because they don't believe. So sometimes you have to work hard to make them understand that this is another age. Like we're in 2025. Okay, so you've got some reporting. We have the information, the compilation, the RSOP, we have this information. We know for each changes, each PR, we build a resultant set of policies. So now we can have, on this day, the configuration was this. On that day, it's that. So if you have a problem between two versions, now you can find out it's easier to troubleshoot what you've changed. Because you have the history of the change in Git, you can also find why. You can see who's done the change, who approved it. So we have the transparency of the changes. And then we can say to other teams, we are the master of this repository, so we can approve or deny your request, but you don't have to wait for us to ask for a change. Oops, sorry, that was my microphone. So you don't have to say, well, I'm going to do this for you when I finish all the tickets. No, you do the work, you offload to the team so they don't have to depend on you. They just depend on you for the review. And they can validate with the quick feedback that we said. Even if they just change the YAML, something's going to be built. And then if the build is successful, that means the change makes sense. And if they're doing something wrong, add another test. Next time, they will have the feedback.
And by the way, you have seen the structure, the workloads, right? We have, and the YAML files are organized by folders. Each folder is named after the workload, Azure AD, Exchange, Entra, and so on and so on. So what you can do in Azure DevOps is create a branch policy that takes a certain approving team depending on the path that was changed. So if the change was something with Azure AD, we ask the Azure AD team for approval. If it is a change in Exchange, we don't even bother to go to the Entra ID team, we just go to the Exchange team. So it is a fully integrated workflow that automatically pulls in the right reviewers so that the collaboration is quick and effective.
This one is using Azure DevOps, but you've seen it's PowerShell scripts and it runs on your machine, right? It also runs on your machine. So that means if you're using something else, GitHub, that works. And actually, that's code owners in GitHub. Bitbucket, that works too. Basically, you're just doing the same thing. You have Git, you have an agent, which is, as long as you can configure your agent the way it needs to be, which is, with PowerShell and stuff like that, you can run that everywhere. You don't need anything special. Obviously, you will need the connection to Azure with Entra ID, but as long as you can run it somewhere, that's fine.
Yeah.
So you have, delegating changes to a trusted agent, and that's the point. So at the moment, how do you configure the agent to make the changes between dev, QA, and prod, or test and prod?
So we have one agent per tenant. So this is just a virtual machine with a managed identity or a certificate per tenant we want to manage. So depending on the build stage, dev, test, prod, we are assigning the job to the build agent that fulfills the right demand. So that means that the build agent in dev will never, by accident, build for test and then has problems contacting the right tenant. So one build agent per tenant to separate also the credentials and the security stuff. And the build agent is just a Windows machine. It could be also a Microsoft hosted agent, but because of troubleshooting and get access to files, it's much easier for us at the moment to work with our own VMs. But in theory, it's only a little change to go to Microsoft hosted agents.
Which tier would your agent, or which tier would you access Azure DevOps? Would that be tier 1 or tier 0?
Tier 0. I mean, we have all the critical stuff there. We have the configuration of the whole tenant. So if you do not consider this tier 0,
No, exactly.
then
We host our Azure DevOps pipelines in tier 1, and I want to automate stuff in tier 0, which would violate the tiering model, since
Yeah.
you cannot control tier 0. So,
yeah,
which is why the trigger me is like, oh, okay.
yeah.
But if you access your Azure DevOps stuff from your tier 0 account, then I guess, yeah.
Yeah, so you need, for each tier, you need to have your own Azure DevOps environment just to make sure that you're not violating the principles.
Yeah, we don't sync our identities tier 0 in the cloud, so
Yeah. Ah, okay.
trade-off.
Just a question about the different environments. They're all tied to their own tenant, right? So
Yes.
Yeah.
That obviously must increase costs then when you're essentially due to license any of the.
Yes, that's why usually people say, well, it's too expensive to have a test environment. So let's
Which is
just
even
go to
more
prod.
expensive.
So yes, there's a cost with this. And then the question is, what's the cost of running into production issue? So that's the calculation you got to do. You don't have to have these 3 layers, these 3 tests. It depends really what you need. And that's why that's exactly why we have a hierarchy. Because you want to have everything, enough tests. You don't have to test all of the things all of the time, I would say, but you have to test enough to gain trust. So as soon as you're making a change and then you don't trust it enough, then you're missing something. So the balance act is, how much does it cost into budget directly, effort, time to maintain as well, and the benefit of the trust that you're building. And as soon as you have an issue, we say, well, we should have had a test for that. That should have been thought before. But at least you know how to catch it.
I mean, this is not a new question, right? So
Yes.
previously you had a whole on-prem infrastructure just for dev, just for tests that needs to be maintained as well and even cost a lot of energy, right? So, no?
Fraud. But it's the same. If you have a test environment, so that's a way to represent the different layers. And obviously in dev, you will have less resources than you have in prod because you don't need to have 55 file server in prod. You can, if you're just testing the configuration, for instance, it's not load testing, then in dev, you can have just 3 or 4 servers. Maybe you don't need all the regions, all of the things.
Yeah.
So that's for you. But that's
Very minimalized.
That's the point. It's a data decision. So it's the business decision. You know, what's the good way of doing this? If you start writing this in your scripts, in your imperative scripts and things like that, even in your configuration, if you write the DSC configuration, well, how do you have one DSC configuration for the dev and one for the test? That's getting very hard to manage. So with this hierarchy in the data layers, it makes it much easier. All right, no time for the hands-on. Yeah. If you still have battery, don't lie. So if you do have battery, you can do the hands-on number 4, which is creating the group through the PR. If you have done the pull request, then you raise your hands and you tell us, I've done the pull requests. And then you can do this. And actually, I'm thinking that, no, they don't have, they have permissions into the, no, they need to fork.
No, they have their permissions to the repository.
Yes, you have permissions to the repository. If you log in, you have permission to the repository. So probably they can do everything just in the web browser.
They can, right. So in the web browser, you can create a branch, right? Manipulate the file in the branch, create the pull request, and if you want to go the full road, then you have to clone the project first to your local machine, and then do the change in there, so as we demonstrated in the notebook.
You create a pull request, you raise your hand, you say, well, I've created a pull request, then we will check maybe on the phone. I actually know because I'm not authenticated there. But you can check on the laptop, and then if it looks okay and the build is successful, then we can validate that.
This is also a nice thing. Azure DevOps sends you emails, right? As soon as a pull request comes in, the relevant people are getting notified, so you have really a collaboration tool via email that is, missing.
If you have that on your phone, you can just approve on the phone. And then you see, people don't need to understand all of Git and how Git works. Sometimes you say, well, if it's a simple changes, so in this case, it's just adding a group, but it could be changing configuration. Sometimes you just have to teach someone, let's say HR, to change some information about a group. And then they can just go into the web interface, make the change, and then you explain them. Obviously, you need to commit into a new branch because they don't have access to do anything because you have protection rules. And then you have a GUI, which is your Azure DevOps. Obviously, not everyone in HR would like to use that, but at least if they don't want to wait for the ticket to be processed, that's going to speed up a lot the creation of the group. So at the beginning, you say, well, that's a new thing for them to learn, but as soon as they understand they don't have to wait on IT to do the work, just to review, then that's going to speed up the whole process because then you remove the queue and then you don't have to help them making the change or do the change for them because you would still need anyway a pull request with one of your colleagues. So you remove a lot of friction into your changes.
And by the way, a couple of companies, to restart it, I needed to learn a lot of technologies by force that I don't want to learn. But because of the trends and the market, for example, one tool that I always hated was OneNote. Some companies love it and they do all the documentation in OneNote, which is extremely messy because you have no clue who changed a certain part of documentation. So some companies or some engineers told even their managers that it could be a good idea to get accustomed with Git because Git is just a management tool for text, not necessarily code. And these companies have moved all their knowledge bases, their wiki, to a Git repository, which is not a hard thing to do. So Git is one of the technologies that I was kind of forced to learn, but never regretted it. It has only advantages. There's not a single disadvantage in using Git. Nothing.
If you do it wrong, there's quite a few. But that's why there's a session on...
Yeah. The pull request, finished, right? 30 minutes ago. Let's hit the refresh button. There it is, right?
So change the file, commit the file, create the PR, accept the PR, and that's it. That's all the human interaction. Everything have happened in the background.
Yeah. And
Without any DSC. We didn't touch any DSC. We just changed the YAML file.
please.
If you modify group memberships and run it again, is it going to clear all the members because they're not cleared in the...
No.
You define the desired state. So in your declaration there in the YAML file, you say, well, I want to have all of these members as an example. Then that would just make sure, does it exist? That's based on the resource, because you're not writing code right now. So it depends. I would say in general, the idea is it depends how the resource, the DSC resource is written. But we said to write a proper resource, you need to have idempotency. So you need to see how you manage it. But then it depends.
But let's extend this a bit. So the question was initially, does reapplying the configuration remove group membership if it was added manually afterwards, right? Kind of?
Yeah, basically, if I didn't declare it,
Yeah. Okay.
then I added it manually.
So it should not. But this point makes it even more important to have a test environment, because the DSC resources are not written by you. They are written by a community, and you definitely want to test that critical part of your infrastructure before applying it to production, because there was actually exactly that bug. So the DSC resource did something wrong and cleared all the memberships of administrative groups. And this is a disaster, right? This is a big disaster.
It goes back to, did you build the trust into your automation system? And one way to trust it, and if you want to go cheap, and you test in production, like you expose yourself to big risks. So you want to make sure that you trust it in a test environment or a dev environment first.
Yeah. So now we have, I think, 3 parameters. One is remove group from, the other is add group from, and the other is this is my membership as I have defined it, right? Yeah. But the bottom line is it depends on the resource, because maybe there is a distribution group for Exchange resource and it does it slightly different, right? So all these resources have been written by different humans, and therefore also the behavior is slightly different. Yeah.
So you can do the hands-on. Who wants to do the hands-on on this one? Yes, you're tired. Right? You would like to, but yes.
But
very conveniently, you don't have any more battery.
If you're interested, take the piece of paper home, and you can do it later. So we will leave the environment up and running for the next couple of weeks. And if you have any questions, of course, you can also experiment with it and get back to us.
Not too long, because as soon as the recording is out, all the secrets will be out. So, so we trust you, but actually that's yours, so I don't mind. It's his tenant, so it's fine.
It's Microsoft tenant.
Yes.
Good.
All right.
Slides.
If you don't want to do the hands-on, we can go straight to the next slide. Okay, so DSC pipeline. So we had DSC out of the box, and that's why we make the difference with the DSC pipeline. So is the DSC pipeline the best thing ever? Not quite, but we're getting there. So we have something which is still repeatable. It reduces human-induced errors. You can add login tracing, and in this case, it's built in. We've shown you the RSOP. The artifacts are automatically published into your build pipelines. So you have lots of traceability that is built in. Obviously, we've shown you it's using Git. So you have the things in Git. Then it depends, how people write commits or AI for some. How you make your pull requests and things like that. You have the abstraction layers that is built in there. And as I said, it's self-service, so you remove some friction. You have control gates, and you can add more control gates. We gave the example of a simple gate, which is just the code review, but you can add more things. And then you can add your logic. It's just PowerShell. You can go and ask a service, do you want me to deploy now, yes or no? You have many other ways. We just gave you one simple example. And then, as you've seen, we've got different rings. So then if there's something that is found in the dev environment, you don't want to carry on and then deploy into the next environments. So how much do you trust once it's in dev? If it's just deployed in dev and then it's there, I'm happy, I go in test. Or should I wait one day before I go? You have to build your logic, so then you build trust. And that's not something we can do for you. It depends on your organization. The limitations now. So we've removed the imperative insertion, the complexity. The complexity is more scalable now, and it's less context sensitive. We just have the data. People don't need to learn the DSC bit. We don't need this anymore. It's still a little bit hard to troubleshoot, and there's many reasons to this. One is, well, you had to understand the DSC first before you could understand what's happening when you just change the YAML. Otherwise, it would have been the quickest example of this pipeline, which is, you change the YAML, you see it, now it works. Thank you, everyone, you can go back home.
So basically, implementing a solution like this takes about a week if you have experts on board, otherwise 2 or 3 weeks, right? And if you don't have very PowerShell affine and infrastructure as code affine people, then it's going to fail, right? You need to have some real DevOps people. And many organizations are ignoring the first 3 letters in DevOps, right? They just think it's a different way of ops. No, it's not.
We took 2 hours to explain you how DSC worked before we told you you don't need to know any of those. But if we went the other way around, then that would have made no sense. And now you've seen all the steps, we just abstracted this away. So now when we want to define what we want in Entra ID and M365, we just say, oh, we just want this group with these things and these characteristics, which is exactly what your manager may ask you. Or another team will say, well, we need this group to do this. Do it yourself. You've got the Git repository, you have example, when we've got the build that works, that's fine. I will look at the PR. If the PR fails, but because we're missing a test or something, I will add the test so then that never happens again. And then you have continuous improvement with your teams. And you reduce friction because they don't have to open the tickets and for you to say, well, I'm going to do it next sprint, They just say, you do it, and then when I'm available, I'm going to do the review. And when I see this and it's built and I have all the validation done before I look at it, 3 clicks, approve a pull request, and then it will automatically be deployed. So now we've got the separation between the code, so the DSC resource, which exists and exists from the community. You can write your own, obviously, but there's a lot of things that exist already. And then the code is really specific to your company. So you're focusing on whatever your organization needs. There's less manual interaction. You don't have to run anything. You should, when you're making some changes, probably test them locally. But if it's a simple change, and then as you've just done a copy-paste, the build agent will do the run for you. So sometimes you just don't test locally. Only when you start doing complex changes. And
by the way, I want to add something to this, because my first large DSC project that I presented in 2016, right, at the 2017 PowerShell conference was with BMW. And we've been so proud about that BMW also allowed us to use the name. And the audience was pretty happy because finally there was a tool set around DSC that made DSC much more usable. Everybody was happy except this guy, right?
The Bruce Payette was there.
Okay, he wasn't happy as well.
And then we said, no, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I didn't understand why I was doing it wrong. And Stephen Murawski then said, I will never understand the solution if I don't understand the problem that I'm having. And so slowly I got into this whole idea, and BMW finally declined the solution because of the same reason that Gael, Stephen, and Bruce Payette expressed themselves. There were too many manual interactions, too less traceability, so it was just the good old way of automated administration put into a different kind of look and feel. But there was no real value, no real safety. And the manual interactions that they had always created trouble, even in the test environment. So imagine you want to have a full deployment for their domain controllers, 400 domain controllers doing a change in the wrong way, so it's a disaster. Yeah, and so I strongly recommend that an infrastructure as code solution can only work successfully if you have it in a fully automated way like that. Otherwise, it's not going to be accepted.
If you don't know that you should have this, it's because you haven't hit the problem where this becomes the constraint.
Yeah.
At the moment, you have another constraint which is more important to you. The constraint might be, well, I don't know how to configure Entra ID. That might be your first constraint. So if you don't know what you have to configure or why you need to configure it, then scaling this configuration is not a problem. Collaborating with your colleagues is not a problem because you have another constraint, which is learning about the technology and how to configure it. So every time in your process, you will have different constraints, and then you need to recognize them. And the problem we've seen is like you had, your experience you had with BMW, is you trying some changes, but then at some point they get to the point where, now we've got this problem, but then you need to go back to the solution you engineered and then reiterate from the start, so then you take this new. And every time we had this slide like this one, when we compare and we have all the limitations, what you've seen in the 4 hours there took us several years. And not just me, Stephen Moraski before me, and then Michael have seen exactly the same thing before, and he still sees the same thing with the new DSC v3, and then they're trying to build as much as they can, but then a lot of it is how you work with the technologies. So remember this, there's always this constraint which will shift over time, and we're trying to show you one way that is probably fine for a long time because you can scale this. But if you start to look at the documentation and start from scratch your solution because you say that one is too complex, I don't want to go through the DSC workshop, you start doing your way, like you did before the DSC workshop, you will hit the wall at some point. So we just show you the way, but then you still have to do the hard work.
Oh, yeah.
One key element, and it's really about the configuration data. DSC is a tool. It doesn't matter. If you use Terraform, if you use Ansible, if you use Puppet, these are just tools. And honestly, we don't care, but what you see with the different tools and different concepts, they all go back to it's about the configuration data. This is the important things, and that should model your organization. But the problem is when you're dealing with a tool and it's a new tool and it's a new toy, maybe you say, well, DSC v3 sounds cool, I need to go and look at it. Which is great, and give feedback to the PowerShell team, they would love it, and then you will learn a lot of things, great. But yes, you need to understand, the configuration data and, how to separate the how you're going to do stuff, which is the DSC resource things. You create DSC resource modules, but then the declarative part, the data is what. And the what is, well, I have, all my environments, they will all have these groups, and then this specific environment will have this specific group, or maybe an override on the group name or something. So you need to make sure your code is compressible. So I will write once, and only once I will write the Entra ID group, so that if I say, make me this group, it just happens. I'm not going to say, create this group, and then another instance of create this group. The code is written once, and then you just provide data to it, a bit like the parameters in PowerShell. And the data represents the business logic. Okay, the business logic is important. Don't always try to adapt the data with the systems you have. Try to see what you need, and then how you can decompose it so that it makes sense. Because that's how you record the intent, again, of what you want to have and the reasons. So with Git, you can explain why. We've seen the DSC build process. What happens, what the scripts are doing. Basically, as you've seen, you do the checkout, so it takes all the files, the YAML files in the repository that you've cloned on your machine as well. Datum is the module which is used with this information, so it gets some information. There's a lot of other things you can do we haven't shown you yet, but that is much deeper. Maybe if we have time, we can show you some stuff. And then we compile this, these layers of data into the RSOP, and then we can validate this data. Have you tried to define the same group twice? Do your groups respect the naming convention that you've set and you've configured and you've put that into the pester tests? Right? You can configure anything like this even before you start the compilation or the test on the actual tenants. There's a lot of things you can test in your data so that they make sense to your organization. And once you've done that and you validate all of these things, you can compile the MOFs, which is the artifacts that you're going to use. And then you save it into a folder, and then you will start the deployment. So you see the DSC part, well, there's the artifact there, and then you have the actual deployment here. So when you think about DSC or any other tool, it's after all of this. What's important is the data. That's what the human interact with. The rest is taken care of by the pipeline. So as long as you can automate this part, this is where you will add value. Because you know what you need in your organization. You know that to integrate with a new firewall system, you need to create the groups that are configured in a certain way. That's where you provide value. Creating them off, moving them off to a folder, applying this, that's not something that you create value. So that should be automated. Make sense? And then we always have this question that comes from, platform managers and build, and that's the most difficult discussion. But surely all this new complexity, these new things I need to learn, that's going to overwhelm our team. And that goes back to what I just said. It feels complex because a lot of it is new. And yes, it is. And then it used technology like DSC that you took 2 hours to find out and understand a little bit, but then that doesn't really matter. So most of the complexity is actually somewhere else. When you manage an infrastructure, whether it's a server, whether it's Entra ID, you need to manage the complexity. And the complexity is not just learning a new thing. The complexity is composed of many different variables. So imagine that you're configuring, let's say for this example, a service stack. I want a few things put together, and I need a certain amount of changes. If you have 2 stacks, you need to have more changes, right? So you have the scale. The more things, the more features that you want to configure, the more changes you will have, okay? The more configuration items you need to have. So if you keep going, there's some of the changes. The complexity with time. If this thing lives for a long period of time, you will increase the number of changes and then the number of configuration items over time that changes. So if you need to say, well, what's the state now? Is the cumulative process of all the changes you had before. So the longer you have Active Directory running into your organization, the more complex your organization will be because there's a lot of knowledge that will have gone over a year and then a lot of changes that goes through. So then you have to understand you have the resulting state, which is the desired state when you use a declarative system. But basically, what's your current state? The source of truth is everything that happened to it before and what it is right now. It's conditioned by the result of all the changes you had before. And then you have the complexity, which is the collaboration. If you're one person managing 10 machines, you don't have to find out where the information is coming from because it's obviously coming from you. But let's say you have half of the machines but 2 persons doing it. The complexity is not in the same place, but it's actually getting harder because you need to make sure you communicate to understand where it's coming from. And, the more people, you are scaling the collaboration, which is making harder because you build up institutional knowledge about what's the configuration and the changes. And then sometimes you got the burst factor, which is taking one of the team out. And what happens is then you don't have access, the brand problem. You don't have access to, what happened there, what changed. You've lost part of the institutional knowledge. So you need to make sure your organization is resilient enough so then you don't trust on just, he has to be there. Otherwise, the company stops and you can't make any change. So you need to have this information somewhere. And Git is a very good tool to do that. So make institutional knowledge less critical. You're still going to build up because obviously you can go through the Git history. It's much quicker to ask Raimund, why did you make that change? Git blame. And then you go and ask him, why have you changed this? So to go back, the conclusion is any improvement not at the bottleneck is an illusion. So we talked about the constraint. I said the constraint is going to shift. This is from the theory of constraints. Always remember this. Maybe you have something that limits you at the moment in your organization. In 2 months' time, if you change, if you evolve, maybe it's not going to be at the same place. It's not because I tell you, this is the way to go, which I believe, and we believe. If you are the only one managing, just a little infrastructure, probably this is overkill because you don't have the complexity that requires it. If you have 10 people managing an organization with a few thousand users, definitely you should have something in place. I've never seen a single person manage this amount, of data for a sizable organization. So there's things that you need to do, or you need to throw more people at it. But then you have the collaboration complexity that comes with, knowing bus factor and all of these things. If you start a project, do you have the experience of the complexity? That's what we said. We start somewhere and we build something and then we realize that, oh, there's a wall there. You told me, I didn't believe you. I kept going and then I hit the wall. So sometimes you just need to find someone who has the experience in that complexity and then tell you whether there's a wall in the direction you're going. So go, and you're in the right place. You're in the conference where you have many people that have been trying many things. Just go ask the community. If you ask a manager, it's going to have a very different point of view, and it's probably not going to be technical. You have constraints, and everyone has constraints, but look at the experience of the community as well. Finally, will the added knowledge required, knowing all of those things? You spend 4 hours to scratch the surface of different ways you can have the data. There's a lot of complexity that goes with defining data in YAML. And there's many ways where in the system that we built, you can dynamically find some of the data from other sources of information. Like, I want to specify an IP, but the actual IP will be dynamically generated whenever we run the configuration because it's actually not fixed. So that's maybe querying another system, going from a database, or there's many different ways. So there's a lot of things that goes on, and there's a lot of complexity. But that means if you get to the point where you can have these discussions that you have information from a registry, a database, or something, that means you're not limited anymore by the technology itself. So you've abstracted away from it. So if you have someone that asks, well, is it not going to be too hard to learn all of those things? Well, the question is, what is the limiting factor right now? All right. Do you have questions so far? We're nearly there for the question.
Does this work for Teams, like Microsoft Teams too? Because that does all that.
It depends on the resources, but Luke is going to show you. So we showed you the group, Entra ID group, because there's always this that comes, but then it depends on the resources. If you have resources that can manage Teams.
These are the Teams resources. Oh, again.
It's very
So,
good for us.
workloads, there is Teams, and here we go. Right? Yeah.
The challenge and the limiting factor here is you need to understand the parameters and the resource where you can find the information. Basically, you need to understand the library available to you, which is very often the limiting factor.
And maybe the resource doesn't exactly what you do. Maybe it does 95%, 5% is missing. Then adding these 5% is maybe a little bit hard at the first time you add something to a DSC resource. But after a while, definitely easier than starting from scratch by your own and creating a PowerShell script for that.
So, and I think I have 2 questions, but we're going to find out what the questions are as I talk. So I'm not sure what they are. We saw an example, and it was groups. And groups are groups are groups are groups for the most part. They're kind of a defined entity. And so if you were going to add more groups to your YAML, more likely than not, you are going to be adding a new group, but it's just going to have a different name. It's going to have a different description. But it's going to be mostly the same as what you've done already. What about more complex resources? So kind of bumping up against that question, team stuff, or I'm thinking, because this is my world, I'm thinking Intune. So maybe I want to put a new policy out on computers. Is there a good workflow for, I don't see a world where I'm going to jump right into YAML to create a new settings catalog policy, because you're going to have to know very exact settings that you want. I'm not saying no one will ever do it. I'm just saying it doesn't feel like there's a good workflow for the more complex stuff. And I know M365 DSC will do the export and you get a script, but not maybe, is there some way to take an object that exists?
Yeah,
So it's a great question. Let's try to rephrase. I will shorten a bit.
Yeah.
Basically, how do you go from I want to do something complex and I'm not too sure what I need to do, and then I need to code it so then we can reproduce it into that configuration data? Well, the solution is, well, there's no solution because you need to know what you need to do. And that means you need to discover what are the available settings. And that's why, and that's actually the very good reason to have a GUI to start with, is the GUI is great for discoverability. That's the perfect way when you see, and then you can scroll down and then you say, oh yeah, that's the property and thing. So you can do this and then you have to experiment. You need to find, what is it called in the GUI, and then that maybe you will have a description, and then from there you can maybe export this information from bicep JSON, and then you have the name of the property, and then you could go back into the definition of the DSC resources, and then you find, oh, there's an exact match because it's the same parameter name. So then you can find it, and then you see in which resource and where it's set up, and then you put it into your file.
Yeah. And this is exactly the flow that my customers have decided to do, because discovering the DSC resources is kind of painful than doing the translation to YAML even more. So we have the YAML files, and if we download them, so the export works in the pipeline, but you can of course also trigger it locally. And then you can interact with that pretty quickly, and this is how it looks like. That's the export for applications, for example. And with that, I think we can work quite well.
So it's a combination of trying things out to understand what you need to configure, and then configuring it, exporting the information, and then see where it fits into your hierarchy.
So the pure export is not going to help putting your configuration data in the right shape, because it's just a flat file. So you just get an example of an identity or of an object, and then you need to decide where does it go. And if you have the same object in multiple tenants, then you need to identify the portion that goes to the all tenants layer and the portion that is different and is on the tenant layer, right? On the environment layer. So this gives you the idea how the YAML data looks like, and your task is to rip it apart.
Where does it belong?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. More questions?
This is kind of a follow-up question from this same idea. Doesn't that still rely on the all the let's use Intune as an example, the Intune admin portal then, because then the person that's testing and vetting out these changes, figuring out exactly what they need. They still need to go into the Intune admin portal, create whatever policy they want, and then apply that change. Doesn't then that circumnavigate the entire concept of using?
You're not going to change that in prod.
Hopefully not.
Please. Not after today, at least. So yes, so it depends where you're making the change. So yes, if you were doing this in prod and then reverse, which is fine as long as you do it straight away, it could be okay. You have an incident, you know exactly which checkbox to click, and then if you have the trust to do it, fine. But then the very next thing you're doing, you stop everything else once the fire is extinguished, and then you go back to your configuration and you make that change, you validate that change through your wall pipeline, and then because you have idempotency, then it will reconvert to the same thing, so not making change anymore. But at least you have what you've quickly fixed to extinguish the fire in production will be reapplied to your wall environments. But obviously that should be a break the glass scenario. That should not be something that you do often, if at all.
Somehow, I convinced my management and the team we're all going to get on Git.
This is half of the work done.
Magically, everybody's convinced. We're all on board.
Yeah.
I have an existing brownfield environment. Am I setting up a dev and a test tenant and replicating things into those tenants? What's the process?
If you have one that already exists and it's a brownfield scenario, I would not say you start by doing two. You have one, you start by creating a dev environment, and then you try to retrofit what you have in your prod environment to your dev environment, right? And that is really hard. So you need to narrow the scope. You're not going to do your whole environment at once. you're going to say, well, I'm going to focus on just the Entra ID groups as an example. And I make sure that once this is working and then I've retrofitted that in dev, I enable my pipeline so that every change to Entra ID groups is going through my automation. Because you've just this scope, but you can't circumvent this scope anymore as soon as you've automated it. Otherwise, you would go back to the automation field cycle.
And
You start with the groups then. I've created my groups in dev. I'm able to deploy them to test. Is that gonna mess with anything existing in production now? Because you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
It should not, if you have retrofitted everything and you have enough confidence that it's the same thing, now you're not making any change into your groups anymore in your prod environment, okay? Unless you're going through your whole pipeline.
But I think also what I want to add here is, usually these projects start with a very high demand of configuration data. So the manager says, we have this Entra ID or this M365 tenant and we want to control 5, 6, 7, at best all the workloads. Start with understanding the process first. Start with understanding technology. So let's keep with the example groups. Let's just try to create one group in all 3 layers, dev, test, and prod. And if this works, then we slowly onboard more and more data onto this. And this is a process that can take months or even a year until you have significant data there. But as long as you don't have trust in the vehicle, not being sure that the process works end to end, it doesn't make sense to add any more responsibility to it. So slowly.
And this is not a technological issue. This is more that you need to reverse engineer what you had before to understand what trust you need. And then there's a lot of things that is unwritten rules, and that just makes sure that you write the rules in code. You wanted to say, Michael?
Yeah, to be fair, what I'm about to say, I've never seen anybody do this. But from whenever I was, working in IT versus watching all this on football, going through change advisory board and getting approval for my change was harder than if I just did an interactive login and made the change and who's going to help.
Shadow IT.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got to say we're monitoring for interactive logins. If you log in and it was not pre-approved, somebody signed off on it, we know exactly what was going to happen, we can verify the outcome. Now you have to come to some kind of an after-action committee and explain what happened.
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying that that's disciplinary. I'm just saying it's more of a headache than if I would have done it the right way. I've never seen anybody actually do this.
I've actually, I've seen it.
Right? It's the matrix where on one side it's, can I make changes safely? And on the other side it's, can I eliminate standing access to production? Because in an assumed breach scenario, even my own people could decide to go rogue tomorrow. So I need to go through a safe process for release. And as that operational maturity curve goes up, hopefully, in theory, this has been kind of proven by the DORA reports over years, that your outages and security incidents should go down.
Yeah.
It's all kind of theoretical and bro science, but it sounds good.
Actually, it's also, it's kind of what accelerate what's the name of the book? Accelerate the science behind the DevOps report. That's also kind of what they're saying is like, if you have more changes and then over time, then you will reduce risks and you will improve your stability as well. It's not because you're doing more changes. So for this, I actually seen it applying, and it's the incentive. Everything is in the incentive. If the incentive in your team is to close tickets, well, I'm going to make a change. The automation is going to reverse my change. Well, I'm closing another ticket in the next minute because I know exactly which change because I've done it 10 times this week. But if you look at my stats, great. So if your incentive is, if there's something that goes and then you will not to do it manually because it's easier doing that way than going through the cab, obviously that's not a good incentive. So the system, the team's operating model needs to make sure that if it's something that you should be doing, it should be painful, there should be friction. But if it's the right way of doing it, collaboration, making use of code so it's easier to maintain, then there should be less friction. So having a pipeline is less friction. And then if you want to do it manually, you need to request credential. I've seen that actually before. You don't have access to do it manually, so you need to go and request a credential, just-in-time credential. And that means that needs to go through your manager every time you need to make a change like this. And then that's going to be painful because your manager's got other things to do. Then you say, well, why does he want to do it manually again? Can't you do it through another system? And I remember, which was actually probably 10 years ago, they've done this accidentally, but we had a security system that every time you wanted to remote configure something, you need to have, it's called BombGuard now, but you need to request a permission to go and log into a system, and then someone else needed to be there, and they would record your screen, and that was so painful and so slow that we had to develop the system to automatically make the changes, and that was quicker to do.
This probably speaks more to our organization and maturity. You're speaking about, the groups, for an example. I mean, our service desk pretty much handles all the group creations and stuff because it's just easy for them to go and we just need that. I can't imagine our help desk doing the Git commits on the YAML file.
Why?
Again, just goes to...
I've had HR people doing this.
Really?
Yes, but because you show them how to do it in the GUI, and then, it's like 4 YAML files, it's always the same YAML files, and then change it, and that's easy. Because you make protection on the branches, so every time they say, well, make this change, and yes, they have to understand the basics of YAML, but it's always the same changes they're doing. And then when they say save, it says you have to save in a new branch, you say new branch, and then they know that they have to click create the pull requests, explain why they're making the change, and now they don't have to create a ticket where it's 2 weeks so that it gets to the next sprint before we can actually do it. It's there. I just grab a coffee, I see the 5 YAML lines that are changed that, that makes sense, it built, it works, okay, go. Everyone wins because you remove the queue, so that's another DevOps things, but you don't have a queue anymore, which is like, I'm asking this team to do this work, but this team is not available, so we need to make sure we're in sync. And imagine if you have to go back and forth. Oh, you forgot, and that's always the case with other teams. You didn't specify in the form which one you want. Yeah, but the form doesn't give me the option. You see, it's a never-ending process. If you have this in code and you validate this in code, okay, you're missing this information, but it's true that didn't give you the feedback. I write a new test. This is never going to happen again.
And I mean, the first level also changes some ini files or some configuration files on computers. If they don't work, they do ping, they do ipconfig, right? So what is it so difficult to change a YAML file?
I agree.
Yeah.
It's again, what is your limiting factor? We go back to this. Andrew?
I was going to note that the form that they filed to get a ticket could do that work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The forms could ask for the same inputs. The form could do a checkout, a modification, a commit, a pull request, automatically.
I've done that actually before where every time it was back with the DSC when it was creating a new VM. So you would, every time like there would be a form, and the form would actually create a pull request that would just create the new JSON, the new YAML file, which is new node instance. And that would be done like this. The problem sometimes is how do you have, like if you have these items with the files, how do you want to add things? If you're just adding something that doesn't exist, that might be easy when it's just an item. But then it depends a little bit how you write your YAML files. But if it's like this one, just add the thing if it doesn't exist. Pretty easy to do in a project.
And we already do it here when you set up the project. So we run through all the pipelines and then do the necessary changes. So we remove elements from the YAML pipeline definitions. We save it, and afterwards we do our git commit and git push automatically, right? So automating git is very easy because it's just a command line tool.
And on the question as well, so you said the limitation is you don't see the helpdesk people doing a pull request to change that. Basically, when we have this YAML file, it's still a DSL, okay? And the question is, how many items within that DSL is not about the business logic. So, and this is not a jab at the DSCV3, but when you have this DSL of DSCV3, which is based on ARM, that means people need to understand maybe or to know a little bit the ARM DSL so that they can write the YAML in the right way. Here we try to abstract this away with the DSC resources, so then you just have the resource and the properties of the resource over there. But if you have the help desk that needs to find out, as we've shown earlier, which property exists for an Entra ID group, yeah, they're not going to find it. They will have to open a ticket for that one.
But
there we'll have to go through the existing ones.
Yeah. But one of the feature requests that we have is to write a schema, so automatically create a schema by reading the DSC resource, then have the schema to give you IntelliSense behavior, and then, of course, also the editing experience would be much nicer as it is now.
Yeah, the technology exists, but the problem is time and investment. Like
especially
everything.
Time. Yeah.
This is a little out of scope of this lab directly, but in your experience, how do you balance the DSC-based creation of groups, teams, with M365's automatic culling of teams? If a team gets requested and it gets created through this DSC pipeline, and 180 days later, no one's ever gone into that team, and M365 goes, yeah, I'm killing it. How do you...
So that's a feedback loop.
DSC from...
So that's a feedback loop. So how would you do it without ever putting, let's say you have a document that says, we need to have all of these teams. And it's the same things, like how do you have it working at the moment without having any automation around it, to say, well, no one's been there, what do we do with it? It's the same thing. You need to have this cycle. So whether you have something that automatically goes and pulls the information that no one used that team, that can feed into another system, which is removing what is unused. So basically, this is called lifecycle management. Lifecycle management has been a problem for many, many decades, and that's people that haven't thought, let's have a great thing. We're going to create ITIL, so then we have all these processes around lifecycle management, which a lot of it is common sense, or then it's like, it kind of makes sense. Like, no one sane would implement it end-to-end with everything that is in the ITIL thing. But a lot of it is, that's exactly how you should be managing it. Not the implementation, but the concepts of how you need to think about lifecycle management in ITIL makes complete sense. In my opinion, that makes sense. Would I ever implement this by reading the book and then say, let's do all of this? No, obviously not. But then you need this feedback loop. So as we've seen earlier this morning, you start with having the right data. Okay? When you have the right data, then you need to have the right trigger. This hasn't been used since, how many days? So I've implemented that for many years and in many ways. But if you know Adam Driscoll's Iron Man software, universal dashboard. Very easy things that you write a quick script to get the data, store the data in a local cache. You just update this, overnight, every day. And then you know when it's been used last. Then you can very easily have the things that, well, now we need to do something about it. Automatically create a ticket to remove the entry in the YAML file when it's not been used for 90 days. That is very quickly to do, and then it automatically creates your ticket, and then you just go into the YAML file, and then you close the ticket in 2 seconds, and it's done. And then after that, when this is your limiting factor because you have too many of those requests, that's your constraint, and then you say, well, how can I automate this? So I will use PowerShell YAML to actually read the YAML and try to edit the YAML on the fly, so then it removes the thing. But this is very unlikely that it's going to be your limiting factor. There's so many other things before this can happen that just creating a ticket for that one, and it's a 2-minute change, and that will happen, one every month maybe, or 2 or 3 every month, depending on the size of your organization. So think about, is it really worth trying to automate end-to-end, or just raising the alarm bell when it's not been used, and then clean up afterwards? Other questions? Good. If you want to try this, feel free to try this. There's a lot more in the workshop. If you manage machines, there's exactly the same principle and the same pipeline, which is the DSC workshop, and it's in the DSC community repo as well. And we have the resources actually that we forgot to.
One thing, so what I'm doing is I'm doing POC with a bunch of customers. The next one will be end of April. So what I put a lot of effort in is automating the whole setup task. So we have here is it the docs? No, that's the wrong one. Let's go to I think it's the getting started guide, assets. It is docs, sorry. And here we have the getting started guide. And this guide is not that long. It's just doable in, I would say, 1.5 to 2 hours. And then it does everything for you to have exactly the same scenario that you have seen in the last 4 hours. So it creates for you the Azure DevOps project. No, it customizes it, creates the pipelines, the environments, all the bits and pieces that you need. It creates the build agents, connects the build agents to the repository. What else does it do? It creates the apps and the certificates, attaches the certificates to the apps, so all the authentication works seamlessly. So it's all in there. And if you want to understand how the principles work in the backend, then we have exercises in the DSC workshop that are covering how the local build works, how you can add a node, a layer, and all that stuff, and get you an idea how the datum concept works and how the data merging behavior works and so on, right? So we have put it all in kind of, I think, easy to use instruction sets. And of course,
it's a big investment in terms of like getting to know and learn this, but it's up to you because everything's in there. And then when this is a limiting factor, then you can just find us and then we can tell you, which direction to go. So resources, that's DSC community. The DSC community is the community of everything DSC related. We have most, if not all the recordings on YouTube. And otherwise, we meet every 6 weeks on Teams. We have a Teams link, which is available if you click on community calls, on the bottom right. And then you have some logs. So we're not really good at keeping this up to date. Sometimes we catch up. Sometimes feel free to contribute. Everything's in the Git repo as well. But then usually there's a link in there and there's a calendar appointment as well. And then we have people from the DSC community and from Microsoft and from everywhere. We have Winget as well. We have Demetrius quite often that join us on, talk about what's happening with Winget and Winget DSC. Everything's open. Sometimes people just say, well, I have a question about this, or I want to show something.
What's Winget DSC?
Winget DSC, that's a great question for Demetrius. Is he coming this week?
I think he has a session.
Yes, so Demetrius is the PM for Winget, and he's the one, I would say, he would be more than happy to discuss it, and probably is going to present it as well. So, very quickly, Winget is the things to install, but you can create your configuration, and then you can have Winget to execute the DSC configuration. Similar principle that you've seen with the LCM and what we've done today, but with Winget, slightly different ways to set up and stuff, but the DSC resources, exactly the same thing. So you've learned about this, transferring this to Winget DSC, what is it called, Azure DevBox? Yes, Azure DevBox, all of those things, same principle. It very same concepts, most technology is the same. There's evolution depending on which version you're hitting, which is why we had the slide, but same thing. All good?
One more?
One more.
Is this all tooling forward into DSCV3 or is everything changing once that comes out?
So the problem with DSCV3 is, so you've seen we use the agent of the LCM, we use some components, and then DSCV3 is just looking at the framework to enable this scenario in a way which is portable, and then it's code agnostic, and then cross-platform, and all of those things. Smaller footprints, a lot of those things. The problem is it's quite new, it's moving fast, and we're limited by time. But basically, the concepts would be the same, and what we're missing is the agent that can execute the thing, and the DSL that goes from this file that we have, and then converting this into the DSCV3 DSL, which YAML to YAML, that means you need to add some properties, get the information from somewhere. Technically, there's no difficulty there. It's just a matter of time and testing, and it's been GA only for 4 weeks.
We are definitely committed to go that road, but it's too early. and
Yes.
time is too limited to really invest in this. But I think autumn, winter, and we will have made first steps.
And there's still some limitations in DSC v3 or things that are not either not clear, not documented, or still being improved. So I don't know, credential management and things like that. And I know there's a lot of work going on, and Steve and Michael will present all the details. So there's still a gap between these two scenarios, but it's definitely interesting because it should be more efficient to run. The stuff we're doing this is still mostly done in the old PowerShell or things like that. But just changing the version of PowerShell gives you at the very least 30% of improvements in terms of performance. So, we need to benefit this. And then there's different ways to write resources and stuff. So there's a lot that can change. We're just not there yet. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, again. If you understand this, if you understand the concepts that you've got this, whatever tool you use, it's just learning the tool. Learning the tool is easy. You've done it in 2 hours. Learning the concepts, you haven't scratched the surface yet.
I recall a case several months back where we have our enterprise technology team who was already using the M365 DSC. But so we were dependent on the AZ modules, and there's a lot of them obviously. And someone from that team on the same host running the update dependency module messed up our modules pretty bad.
Really?
So yeah, I think in the end they moved it to a different server because we kept on.
This is why we do this on a build worker that is just created for that purpose, right?
Yeah, that is basically what.
Yeah. So
You remember what Jason said? When he had all of these servers, if one of the web server doesn't work, what do you do with it?
yeah.
That's it. That's the spirit.
Well, they got their own now. So,
Yes, exactly.
I'm hoping for.
And
No, the problem is how do you manage dependencies and things, which is the same. If you install a DLL on a machine, is it gonna affect all the environments? Most likely, that would be a problem. DLL hell, you have the same thing with the modules in PowerShell. You have the same thing everywhere. So the question is, can you manage that every time you build this solution, you make sure you clean up your environment? There's a lot of work in this pipeline that goes like this.
Yeah.
How do you manage the PS module path environment? All of those things. How do you isolate your system? If you use Python, you have virtual environments. How can you do something a bit similar with PowerShell?
yeah.
And
So 20% of the time that I invested in this was just to tackle PS module path and dependency problems. Yeah. So it should hopefully gone all away because of that work. Yeah.
Yes, there's already a huge amount of time because before I did, I also had the same issue, and DSC it's been an issue with DSC since day one. And then back in the day, I can remember debugging package management at the time, where it would change the PS module path every time you do something with a resource, and I can see people nodding at the back as well. So yes, it's difficult, but. When you get around it, and then, that's why we build this pipeline with a lot of checks and make sure that is improved. Not perfect, and obviously running this in a container, that means you don't have this problem. As long as you just run a new instance of your container, then that's fine. That's why, where's your constraint? If that's too painful to manage, do it another way, and then make sure you can just kill it and get another one.
But your problem is very common.
I hope you enjoyed this session, and if you have questions, feel free to come and grab us, probably around the coffee machine now, until we can grab a beer or something.